Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Archbishop of Banterbury, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, and as we all know, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you on a Sunday, Robcasting at you from the Robservatory. Boy, it's been an interesting and a fascinating couple of days. Tragic. It's been there's been an outpour. It's not just been tragic, but it's been, in a way, it's been enlightening. It's been uplifting, seeing how certain people have come together. It's run the gamut of human experience, really, is what it has done, and as has this entire year, to be honest. And I choose to believe that something good's going to come out of all of this. It's always good when tumultuous events lead to dialogue, understanding, hopefully action. There's been a lot of great voices out there, and I would advise seeking them out. I certainly have been listening to all kinds of people on all sides of the spectrum. And there have been some voices that have perplexed me, other voices that have enlightened me, still other voices that have made me seek out more information. And I would advise everyone to do all of that. Now, yesterday I came across, obviously I presented an article in the Hollywood Reporter that was about superheroes and our perception of superheroes and how they might affect our own positions or our own thoughts about law enforcement, the government, the military, all of those things. And I found another article at the same time that I always planned on sharing. I knew I didn't have enough time because so many people have been. I don't know what has been going on with this stream. Hang on a second. I don't know what has been going on with YouTube lately. It's been messing around with my connection. Actually, since I upgraded Wirecast a couple of days ago, they sent out a new patch. I upgraded it, and wait a minute, I'm getting a. Hang on, let's see what Elizabeth's saying. Maybe she's telling me that the. Oh, it's fine. Okay, good, it's fine. I was asked to. She was in a horrific domestic situation and suffering the most horrible kind of abuse. And she came to me for help, and I said, we have to go to the police. And we did. And it was an incredible experience all the way around. The kind people, the detective that I had to deal with, and everyone in the police force, my local hometown police force, handled this situation like the utmost of professionals and did with their jobs. They rendered aid, they helped, they brought justice. And I've had good experiences. I think for the most part, what people forget is our police system has to deal with many different kinds of things. They deal with many different, there's a three-dimensional nature to our existence that the police force has to deal with on many different levels. And most recently, as many of you know, I created a medical lecture series with my good friend, lifelong friend, Dr. Michael Schertz, MD. Mike Schertz was a former 18 Delta. He was a Green Beret medic. And after that, he became a consultant with law enforcement, and he is an ER doctor in Portland. And he created, based on basically his anger at things like what he calls active violent events, school shootings, and things like that. He created a medical lecture series that then I turned into he called me up and asked me to turn it into a video series so he could market this course instead of teaching it. He was teaching it all over the world, and he was teaching it to civilians. He was teaching it to gun owners. He was teaching it to first responders, paramedics, and cops. Anybody that might find themselves in active violent events, whether it is school shootings, it could be a bombing, it could be an earthquake, it could be a fire. The whole point of the series is to allow people to render pre-hospital care in these kinds of situations. And it's something near and dear to my heart. It's one of the most important things I've ever done in my life. I've spent the last 3 years creating this series. And it's an online course. You can buy it. It's like a masterclass. And I would like to play the trailer for this class that I am very proud of.
Tactical Combat Casualty Care Guidelines are best practice trauma guidelines that have been customized by the Department of Defense for medical operations on battlefields. They've worked amazingly well. Typical death rate in combat from all recorded modern combat was 1 dead to 4 wounded. And now it's 1 dead to between 9 and 10 wounded. Tactical Emergency Casualty Care Guidelines, we use the Department of Defense's TCCC guidelines as a starting point. We want the right care at the right time. What are we going to cover in this course? Well, everything we're going to cover is consistent with the Department of Defense's Tactical Combat Casualty Care Guidelines. What medical care would you give to a casualty that was in a burning building, that was shot in an active violent event while there's still shooting going on? The complete TC2, it covers everything. Tourniqueting, hemorrhage control, wound packing, needle decompression, military litters, surgical airways, hypothermia prevention and management, IV, IO, everything. I learned in Army Special Forces that all lessons are written in blood. I don't want you to have to relearn those lessons.
Now, the reason I wanted to show this is this class was done in conjunction, well, while we were creating the class, it was done in conjunction with local law enforcement in Portland, both police and SWAT. None of the guys who came out in their spare time to help us shoot what are called scenarios, everything you saw in there with soldiers and medical professionals providing aid, I shot all that. I directed all that. Those were real medics, real police, real SWAT officers coming out in their spare time to help out. And I wanted to say that there is so much going on. Human beings are certainly not perfect people. And if we lived in a kumbaya society where everything was lovely and nobody had any problems at all, I would say, maybe we might live in a world one day that we don't need the police. We don't need, cars won't be stolen. There won't be domestic disputes. We won't have people pulling guns on one another in bars or getting in fights after sporting events or all of those things. There is a world out there of people that we need some kind of mediating force to stop us from our lesser impulses. And that is why I think that it's important to remember that there are many people out there, our first responders, whether it's military, whether it's medical, paramedics, EMTs, or whether it's the police force. The majority of them are there for the right reasons, and they are there to render all kinds of aid. And I think, in my case, having worked directly with a police force to create a series that is directly supposed to stop people from dying from active violent events. We saw things in Las Vegas. 500 people were wounded by a single shooter. We need we need the police, we need the military, we need our EMTs and our fire responders. We need well-trained, smart, intelligent, compassionate people in these positions to make sure that we do live in a society where there is a safety net of some kind. And it's just like everything else. I mean, if having a free society that everyone wants to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we need these things. Every profession has bad apples. Every profession has people that might not have everyone's best interests at heart. I mean, look what happened in 2008. It wasn't like our banking community was there to help everyone out. Your friendly neighborhood lender who was going to make sure that you had a mortgage, whether you could afford it or not. And it brought the world to the brink of financial ruin. So anyway, what we need upstanding people in all walks of society. And I just wanted to say that we can't forget that. My medical lecture series, which is designed for everyone. If you are a civilian, there are 3 levels of this class. The first level, the day class, is helpful to anyone. If you don't know how to properly tourniquet someone, if you are around firearms, it's always nice to know safety. You can render aid if someone is shot, if someone is bleeding out, if a femoral artery is hit. You as an individual can save a life. That is why we designed this course, and we couldn't have done it without the selfless and free participation of people from our law enforcement divisions who were giving us of their time because they wanted to save people's lives. I just wanted to say that up front before we get into this topic because I think it's important. This was what I was going to share yesterday about this article, which, this article was in the Washington Post. Democracy Dies in Darkness is on their masthead. This is by Alyssa Rosenberg. It was published on actually the 4th. Like many other industries, entertainment companies have issued statements of support for the protests against racism and police brutality now filling America's streets. But there is something Hollywood can do to put its money where its social media posts are. Immediately halt production on cop shows and movies and rethink the stories it tells about policing in America. For a century, Hollywood has been collaborating with police departments, telling stories that whitewash police shootings and valorizing an action hero style of policing over the harder, less dramatic work of building relationships with the communities cops are meant to serve and protect. There's a reason for that beyond a reactionary streak hiding below the industry's surface liberalism. Purely from a dramatic perspective, crime makes a story seem consequential. Investigating crime generates action, and solving crime provides for a morally and emotionally satisfying conclusion. The result is an addiction to stories that portray police departments as more effective than they usually are. Crime is more prevalent than it actually is, and police use of force as consistently justified. There are always gaps between reality and fiction, but given what policing in America has too often become, Hollywood's version of it looks less like fantasy and more like complicity. There's no question that it would be costly for networks and studios to walk away from the police genre entirely. Canceling Dick Wolf's Chicago franchise of shows would wipe out an entire night of NBC's primetime programming. Dropping Law & Order Special Victims Unit and a planned spin-off would cut even further into the lineup. But the gap between what some companies and executives have promised this week and what they have done in the past cannot be ignored. As reality television critic Andy Denhart, I think it's Denhart points out, at Viacom CBS, cable network's chief Chris McCarthy pledged to leverage all of our platforms to show our allyship. One of these platforms also wears Cops, a decades-old reality show with a troubled history of participating in police censorship and peddling fear of black and brown criminals. If McCarthy means what he says, canceling Cops would be a start. But simply canceling cop shows and movies would be easier than uprooting the assumptions at the heart of the problem. Say writers made a commitment not to exaggerate the performance of police. Audiences would have to be retrained to watch, for example, a version of Special Victims Unit where the characters cleared only 33.4% of rape cases, or to accept that in almost 40% of murders and manslaughters, no suspect is arrested. If storytelling focused on less dramatic but more common crimes, such as burglary and motor vehicle theft, the stakes would shrink along with the case clearance rate. In addition to revealing the world as it is, art has the power to show us the world as it can be. But when reform doesn't seem like a very real possibility, even modest optimism risks souring into mockery. The closest thing to a reformist police show right now is Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a sitcom that alternates explorations of the policies and identity politics of the New York Police Department with fantastic gags and one-liners. Series co-creator Dan Gore told me in 2016 that he hoped that the show would be modeling what a good police community interaction would be like. I've never doubted in his care in pursuing that ideal. I never doubt his care in pursuing that ideal. This week, Gore and the cast donated $100,000 to the National Bail Fund Network and announced that they condemn the murder of George Floyd and support the many people who are protesting police brutality nationally. Still, as Vulture's Catherine Van Arendonk put it this week, the show can't escape what it is. Neither the show's good intentions and genuine good work, nor its silliness, change the way it prioritizes police perspectives over anyone else's. One way forward might be to emphasize the dialogues and sometimes fierce struggles that take place within police departments. The Shield, which aired on FX from 2002 to 2008, follows the reign and eventual downfall of corrupt detective Vic Mackey and his strike team, based on the division at the center of the real-life Rampart scandal in Los Angeles. In the finale, Claudette Wims, Mackey's longtime colleague and truly decent officer, wins a small victory. Mackey, in exchange for his cooperation in an investigation against the surviving members of his team, is not prosecuted for his crimes, but he is required to spend 3 years in a deadening desk job at Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It takes 7 seasons to achieve that much on The Shield. It's been almost 6 years since Michael Brown was shot and killed by Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, and no one can be blamed for feeling like national reform has moved at a similarly petty pace. If the entertainment industry truly believes that change can no longer wait, it should start with its own storytelling. First of all, I think back to, I'll flat out say, I love stories. I love cop stories. I read a lot of mystery fiction, whether it's James Lee Burke or whether it's Andrew Vosh or whether it's Don Wilson. I'm a big fan of that kind of fiction. I like Michael Connelly. I like shows like Bosch. The Wire, one of the most important and nuanced television shows ever made, which is all about the experience of living in America's urban environments, that begins, yes, literally with a police unit that spills into something that's much greater. And it's one of the greatest television shows that's ever been on television. It's also very ethnically diverse, obviously set in Baltimore, and it has a lot to say. Now, we watch a lot of television. The Sopranos is a show that's about crime. It's literally, the protagonists of that show are criminals. They run criminal enterprises. And it's strange to me to read an article that says we should take all police shows off the air. Now, I agree. Shows like Cops might be problematic. That was a documentary show, and yes, it's also dealing with, sure, it was a show that had real cops dealing with real things and the reality of the world. Maybe that's problematic, and maybe they shouldn't be showing that. But here's the thing. We have shows about straight up financial criminals. Look at shows like Succession or Billions. If we were to get rid of all the drama that shows bad people doing bad things, we wouldn't have much drama left. And I really don't understand that now police reform in America must happen. This is obvious. It's been going on for a long time. But there's been a lot of entertainment that's been about police reform. Go back and watch Al Pacino in Serpico. Now, should Serpico have not been made because it shows corrupt cops and it shows a cop going after his corrupt cops? Should we not have movies like The French Connection that have been made? Is somebody going to go and now arbitrate or tell us what we can and can't watch in terms of our storytelling? I think this kind of article and this kind of thinking is frankly absurd. Drama, telling stories, is about inherently, usually, about, what are human failings? And isn't it our human failings that are the basis of all stories? Sure, you can have romance stories, but even in romantic stories, in romances, you're dealing with people's shortcomings. They don't always see, they don't understand that the person they should love is right in front of them. All storytelling is supposed to illuminate the shortcomings of human existence, or to celebrate the joy of human existence. But drama inherently has conflict in it. And I just think we can't allow ourselves to descend into a world where all we can listen to is what? Stories that are deemed uplifting, or stories that are only, who's going to arbitrate that? Who's going to come in and say, you can talk this way, you can't talk that way, that way? That's what freedom of speech is. That's what freedom from censorship is. And if we're only telling stories that certain people deem, oh, I don't know, proper, where are we going to be? What if somebody decides, that William Shakespeare's stories are problematic? Let's get rid of them for whatever reason. You never know. Human life is complicated. Things happen every single day. People have different things that happen to them all the time. I've been shown as being a villain this week, and I learned. I listened. I've apologized. Myself. I had my own story. If I wanted to dramatize the last 3 days, it could be, or 4 days, it could have been an episode of the story of my life. Things happen in our existence, and we have to learn from them. And what our entertainment at its best does is it asks hard questions of its audience. It hopes. Stanley Kubrick, my favorite director, made a lot of films that deal with very dark subject matter. Lolita, Dr. Strangelove, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, Full Metal Jacket. He illuminated some really terrifying and horrible behavior, even The Shining, on the part of human beings. Was Stanley Kubrick condoning that behavior? No. I think the reason he chose to tell the stories that he chose, and why I love his work so much, is because in telling those stories, he was not condoning bad behavior. What he was hoping to do is have his audience say, well, that's fucked up. I'm not going to live my life like that. I'm not going to be a cad like Barry Lyndon was. I'm not going to lust over a woman's 16-year-old or 14-year-old, however Lolita was. I'm not going to marry a woman so I can get closer to her younger daughter. And that's what Nabokov's story is about. I don't think anyone would accuse Stanley Kubrick of saying that Humbert was a hero in Lolita. But there are certain people that would say today, you can't tell that story. You can't tell that story that Nabokov was telling. That story glorifies whatever you want to say it glorifies. No, it does not. In telling these stories, we are supposed to be smart enough to understand what the meaning was behind the filmmakers, or what people choose to share with us and why. And the only reason we can do that is because we're smart and we're educated, I would hope. And we watch these stories and say, what can we glean from this? Should they not have made The Wire? The Wire, one of the great, not only stories about cops, but stories about education, stories about criminals, stories about the American justice system, stories about our city politics, stories about unions. The Wire is a television show that is about all of us, all Americans. And I would hate to think that somebody would say a show like that shouldn't exist. That is not something that we as Americans should ever condone. If you don't like someone's story, don't patronize that story. Write about it. Talk about it. But to talk about getting rid of an entire genre, an entire history, a whole legacy of storytelling simply because it doesn't maybe fit the narrative of today, I think that's a very, very dangerous and very slippery slope. And I would hope it never comes to pass. Just something I was thinking about today. And I hope to hear from you. Again, the letters are open. Please go to the Burnettwork.net website, and you can send me anything you want me to hear about this subject. And now, as you might know, I have a lot of letters. I'm telling you, they've been coming in over the transom. It's been incredible. And some of them, well, you'll see. This one comes from Danny Lane. D-A-N-I. Danny Lane. Dear Robert, my dear Robert, it says, I listen to your Robcast pretty much every day. Often I'll hear you talk about something and I don't think I should write to you to agree or maybe disagree. And then, I hear you talk about something and I think that I should write to you to agree or disagree, but then life happens and I don't. But now I must. I came to the Post-Geek Singularity and stayed because it feels like everyone is welcome and everyone's opinions are valid. One of the things that I love about you is the sheer joy you exhibit while reading the letters people send. Sometimes you chuckle while reading someone's letter, like there's a joke and we all get it and we're all chuckling too. I don't always agree with you either. When it comes to Star Trek Discovery or Picard, the dingoes stole your baby, not mine. Nice reference. I respect your criticism because it comes from a deep, abiding love of Star Trek. And the language and violence in those shows does jar me. I grew up watching Star Trek at my dad's knee, and I can still enjoy watching those two shows, but I sure can't see my sharing those two shows with my grandkids because of the content. When you tweeted about Captain Dorn's death, I think it was truth. It was raw, unfiltered anger at the injustice of not only what happened to him, but Floyd and Arbery and Taylor as well. People are saying the tweet wasn't you, but I think it was. It was your real emotional reaction. I've listened to you long enough to know that you'd never wish violence on or act violently towards others. But maybe if you had been there and you had a gun, you might have fired in defense of Captain Dorn. I know I would have. What I saw in your tweet was a call to victims of violence to defend themselves. I wonder how your attacker would feel if it were their business or home burning and their father or grandfather dying alone on the sidewalk. I wonder if they'd be just as offended if it were a woman being raped and we called upon victims of rape to shoot to kill. I guess their answer is just to let it happen, like it's a price we have to pay for our complicity in this state of injustice. Rob, I believe that your outrage was justified. Today it seems we are not allowed to have feelings. If you post that you need a haircut, people shame you because others are dying. If you join shutdown protesters at the Capitol, you're selfish and putting everyone's lives in danger of COVID-19. If you wear a mask and stay home, you're a sheep and you're giving up your freedoms. If you join a Black Lives Matter protest, you're contributing to riots and looting. If you're outraged about the destruction of businesses, you're putting more value on things than on black lives. If there's anything that the left should understand and agree on, it's that it's okay to have feelings. Yet as soon as those feelings are about self, they are perceived as self-indulgent and therefore bad. But you are nothing if not one of the most self-aware people I know. Even as you discuss topics and themes, I can hear you explore the territory, probing and questioning, testing out conclusions. You're never so set on a point of view that you can't see the merit of opposition. So you did what you're absolutely best at. You reconsidered the way you expressed your outrage and made a raw and emotional apology. At this point, you are back to square one in my book. You took care of the tweet at large, the tweet aimed at the world. You took responsibility. In what may have been tweeted in the aftermath and between you and other people should just be handled in the same way, between you and them. I will say that it's vicious, cruel, and self-serving to share a screen-capped tweet after the tweeter has not only deleted it, but apologized for it as well. Shame on them. They have apologies to make. I said before that you and I don't always park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. In your tweet, you said that Second Amendment supporters have been waiting for this. Another clue people have seen that would disprove your position to be on the far right. I would say we've been preparing for this, not waiting. No responsible gun owner is looking for a chance to shoot someone. Though I am pro-Second Amendment, I don't agree with open carry. But I do think that there are enough laws in place to regulate the purchase and ownership of guns. We just need to enforce them. I don't want to get into all this now. It seems like a discussion for another day. Maybe sometime over a drink, since I fully intend to go off the wagon if we ever have a chance to sit down together. One thing you mentioned was that you realized you might not have been as well liked by the folks at the Schmodown as you might have guessed. That resonated with me. My job was eliminated back at the end of February, and I had a similar awakening when only one of the directors where I worked contacted me before I left to express any regret or even gratitude for my 23 years of service. That cuts like a knife. And I can imagine how hard that was for you. How hard would it have been for them to just reach out privately and talk instead of throwing out words like racist? Seriously? You, a racist? To wrap this up, I've got your back, Rob. I hate that you were dogpiled on Twitter and that you've had videos deleted. Truer words were never spoken than when you said it would be the folks on your own side of the aisle that came to get you. Just know that I and so many others in the Post-Geek Singularity know who and what you are, and we're happy to be here with you, now at the end of all things. Take heart, the Eagles will be here soon. My very best to you, Danny Lane. Well, again, I would just like to point out that, first of all, thank you for writing this letter. Second of all, the kind of discourse and the kind of letters that I get here is what the opinions that you all send to me is why I will not be silenced and go off the air, because I think it's important that we have this kind of a dialogue. In this particular letter, you can say I was wrong to tweet, you can say you're a Second Amendment supporter, you can say all these things, but this was nuanced and balanced. And in the case, if anyone hasn't seen, I would just like to quickly point out that RB3 and I, that had the problem on Twitter, I worked with RB3. He's a filmmaker. When I was working at the Schmodown, he was shooting everything when we do our little vignettes. I mean, I worked with him for a long time. And when I said fuck you to him, I crossed a line. I need to do, for people, if you want to expect somebody to reach out to me, well, I didn't have, that was unprofessional in the extreme. This is somebody that I work with, that I admire, that I've never had a problem with. And I publicly said, fuck you. You know what? That demands an apology. That is not me. And that was personal. And I thought it was important. And even though I apologized publicly for my tweets, that didn't address the fact that I went at somebody personally, that I came at them, somebody I knew to not certainly didn't deserve that. They didn't deserve my ire. They didn't deserve to be sworn at publicly by me. Most of the people that I've ever worked with, I admire. I admire anybody also who's trying to pursue a career in film, who's doing all that work. I mean, RB3 was me when I was his age, going out and doing the work he can do, honing his craft, trying to get better at what he's doing, his career. And things started to spiral out of hand. He agreed to sit down with me. I didn't know if he would, and he did. And we talked about it, and I listened to him. And he had to put up with me like talking too much, you know me. But he listened to me too. And I listened to him. And we had, I thought, a great conversation. And I'll tell you something. He accepted my apology to him, and he deserved to have that apology. And I think that's what this channel's all about. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And please, being that this was the first letter you wrote, Danny, I would love it if you continued to send me letters like this one. Now, if you disagree with me, if you're going to write a letter of that quality and you want to come at me and disagree with me, by all means do so. I would be proud to share it on this show. Hisham Durbis writes in. Hisham Durbis says, Dear Robert, hang on. Wow. Dear Robert, as I write this letter to you from Dubai, and I'm a Muslim Palestinian brought up in the United Arab Emirates while having an American education. I feel I'm blessed in acquiring what I consider the best of both worlds, Western systems and Eastern principles and values. I was lucky enough to have been introduced to comic books through Asterix the Gaul by the amazing duo René, I'm so bad with the French names, René Goscinny and Albert Uderzo. And from there, I delved into Luck Luke by Morris and later by René Goscinny. Even as I approach my fourth decade, I can easily read these comic books and still find value in them. As a kid, I was hooked on classics like The Twilight Zone, Lost in Space, Land of the Giants, Star Trek, the original series, and of course, my favorite franchise of all time, Star Wars. As a teenager, I became a huge fan of MASH, Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and The X-Files. Amongst the great movies I'm excited for are Dune, Tenet, and the next phase of the MCU. You and I certainly park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. Having said all that, When I first stumbled upon your work in this world of YouTube, it was through Collider Heroes with John Schnepp. May he rest in peace. I perceived you as the hot toys guy, an older gentleman with a child's heart. And since then, I've realized that indeed you are this young at heart, passionate, patriotic, and movie lover, and I've maintained following your perceptions at the John Campea Show as well as Robservations. I found myself compelled to send you this letter following recent unfortunate events of you being engulfed in the new cancel culture. With COVID-19, the global economic recession, and now the George Floyd riots, I feel that America is entering a dark era. As someone who was raised from a family of immigrants, witnessed war, and faced constant racism till today, just because of my passport or dialect, as I see what is happening in the U.S., all I can say is, history is the greatest teacher. And from TV, I'm reminded of DS9's Past Tense, a great two-part episode, by the way, as Cisco and the crew accidentally beamed down in the days before the Bell riots. That episode used as a plot device to explore America's issues with racism, violence, and apathy toward human suffering. It resonates with today's events. As I observe America from the outside, and as I follow news from my homeland, and witness adversaries and wars within the Middle East, and being a live witness during the Egyptian Revolution of 2011, whose best friend was killed in one of the riots, and as someone who has brethren in the Holy Land who are being tortured and radicalized daily, I know what it means to fight for a cause. Despite all of this, I'm optimistic that good shall prevail, because that is what history has always taught us. Twitter, Facebook, and all other social media outlets are double-edged swords that can highlight great moments and darkest and most ugly of what humanity has to offer. It reminds me of the Drumhead, the Star Trek The Next Generation episode's infamous speech. The first speech censored. The first thought forbidden. The first freedom denied. Chains us all up irrevocably. If only the new Star Trek and real-life people truly wise up and learn from history, as well as what the best of pop culture has to offer. You seem like a genuine person, Rob, and we all have bad days and emotional outbursts. Lesson learned, I suppose. One has to think twice before writing something online when one is in an emotional state. I hope to see you soon on the John Campea Show. The two of you have great chemistry in the discussion, and whoever is upset and feels offended from Sen, just be mature and have a calm conversation and clear out emotions. People are just too easily offended these days, to the extent there is a constant need to explain and tread on eggshells, as well as be super PC to avoid hurting others' feelings. Really, people need to have a thick skin should they want to survive in life. I saw your apology video, and while I understand the need to issue it personally, I feel you did it not because you wanted to please or ask for forgiveness, but rather because you owned up to what you felt was an error of your part and wanted to set the record straight. That's what real men do, and you have my respect. I close this letter with this thought, Rob. In his post-apocalyptic novel, The Line of Departure, author G. Michael Hoff famously wrote, "Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times." I hope the U.S. comes out of these times stronger, and I know that you, Rob, will also be stronger. Salam from Dubai, and I hope you would read my letter and perhaps get connected. Sincerely, Hisham Durbas. Again, Hisham, I can't tell you enough how much a letter like yours means. Thank you very much. And I've always said that no one's perfect, and I certainly haven't been perfect in my life and my career. I've made lots of mistakes, but I've tried not to make those mistakes in my work. I've worked on a lot of things that a lot of people would look at and be like, ugh, that's just a worthless B movie or whatever. But I'd like to think that my involvement in whatever project that I've worked on has made that project a little better. And I've been gratified when people who have come to know me through my work have said such kind things, because that's what I think is most important. Alfred Hitchcock made 53 movies in his career. No one remembers where he ate dinner. I mean, I'm sure if you read a biography of him, you could find that out. or his day-to-day existence, or maybe what he was like. What was it like to sit down and have a drink with Alfred Hitchcock? I don't know. But we do remember his movies. We can go back and watch his movies. He's made some of the greatest movies of all time. And that's what's left. And what I've tried to do through my work is to provide the truest example of what I believe in and what I am as a person. So I'm glad that you started watching Collider Heroes with John Schnepp. I miss John every day. I wouldn't even be on YouTube if it wasn't for John Schnepp and John Campea. People forget the 6th episode of AMC Heroes I did with Schnepp and Campea, and we did many shows together, and I even did the Schmodown with John Campea and John Schnepp. And so, I'd like to think when John Campea invited me over to come onto his show, that I would like to think what John Campea and I have done is an extension of what John was doing. And yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you watched, and I'm glad, please, anytime you want to write in a letter, please write in. And like you, I'm really interested in seeing Dune. And, you identified yourself as a Palestinian Muslim. And I want to say, obviously, I've had some strong views, especially on radicalized Islam in my life. But I'm really interested. I want to see if Dune illuminates. I mean, if you go into Islamic history, a lot of science was created there, a lot of mathematics, algebra, things like that. And Frank Herbert looked to Islam to create the Fremen in Dune. And it'll be interesting to see if many science fiction fans or movie fans will watch Dune and have maybe delve into Islamic culture and Islamic history and look into that. So we'll see. I'd be curious to hear what you think after the movie comes out. And by the way, like you, I can't wait to see Tenet. Oh my God. Pedro Ferreira is back. He says, "Hi, Rob. Hope you are well with everything that's been happening. I understand you came under fire from certain Twitter users for a post you made. I just want to say, I, to some extent, agreed with what you said. People should be allowed to protect themselves. Your tweet was made in anger, however. You did apologize, so I see no problem. If people are still complaining, they would have been complaining whether you apologized or not. The problem being people don't listen to one another. My feeling on this has always been if both the police and the random Joe didn't have access to guns, some of these issues would be non-existent. As for my letter, I was going to provide a guide to a movie you're unfamiliar with, but in light of what's been going on, I wanted to put forward my own viewpoint of discrimination over the years. I will try and put forward my own views on what I grew up with, but please excuse my dyslexia. I find it very hard to structure my thoughts into something that makes sense. My own experience will offend people, and I apologize to all of you in advance, as I'm not black. I was born in the UK, and my parents are Portuguese immigrants. I just disagree with certain ideas that float around in our society. My own experiences are different not just because of my Asperger's, but because at least in the UK, the way black and white people live together is slightly different. The police, for one, have less history in police brutality. I say all this as it's common to deplatform a white person due to them not having the experience of being black. I get that, but listening to each other is a good way to increase our knowledge of a big problem in our society. To give you some background, my entire life I've been picked on, not just by black people, but I say this as it will be important later. I've always been an easy target due to the way I look and my neurodiversity. My history of growing up in racism may surprise you. Since an early age, I've been taught to have guilt towards black people. It's always amazed me as black people were being put on this pedestal. I just wanted to treat everyone the same, but I was taught to feel guilt toward the black community and to feel fear as well as paranoia in accidentally upsetting someone who is black. I'm not sure if this is normal behavior for a 6-year-old, but this was my experience from an early age. As I grew up, I learned more about my parents' history as immigrants coming to the UK. Their first house together as a couple was a part of South London called Brixton. I had to do a bit of research on this to make sure I'm not talking out of my ass. The story of Brixton is interesting, as the turn of the 20th century welcomed immigrants from all countries, like Portugal. Notable is the end of the 1940s, which saw the arrival of immigrants from Africa, Caribbean places, now known as the Windrush generation. At least that's what Wiki calls it. The Windrush generation was huge, and most African immigrants settled in Brixton. This made Brixton unevenly a black district to the point that over the years the black community took it as their own. To some extent, I see their point. Why should they share? Racism was evident throughout the world, and it only seemed fair that they have some sort of entitlement, even if it means Brixton became mostly a black district of London. Even with this knowledge, there was unrest in the community, which blew up in 1981, some years after my parents moved. When my parents lived during the 1970s in Brixton, they were treated differently by Brixton, mostly the black community. They were given strange looks and weren't really welcome much into pubs. There was a sense they weren't wanted due to not being black. It's an odd situation and probably unbelievable to your U.S. listeners, but it did happen. Today, Brixton is still mostly a large part of London, although ethnic diversity has increased. Again, I will probably offend people when I say this, but I don't believe in white privilege. A white privileged person to me is someone who grew up very wealthy, living in an expensive house with an expensive job. That certainly never happened to me. I have no privilege growing up. I came from a working class family and I worked hard for everything I've gained while being the target of bullies. There are many people who have managed to get roles or jobs I applied for who aren't white males. People on social media will attack me with, if you don't understand the term, it has to do with racial profiling. That's true in the sense that I've not been picked on by the police. What has happened in the past, police officers grinning or chuckling at me because I look weak and completely non-threatening for other reasons. They don't respect me, so I can't say I've had it perfect, since I've had some form of discrimination. I also don't feel positive discrimination is a good thing in opportunities. It works to some extent. I also don't feel positive discrimination is a good thing in opportunities. It works to some extent. For someone in my position, it becomes a barrier. For instance, in the past, I applied for what I thought are film industry internship positions, only told to be qualified, that I'm not qualified because I'm white. There's nothing positive about positive discrimination, as it targets by race rather than someone who has the skills for the job. I wonder very much if that's the way forward. I'm a simple person, Rob, and I want to treat everybody the same. My problem is, if we begin segregating races and calling some of them ethnic minorities, we put racial labels on them, and it might help them, but in the long run, it creates a sense of entitlement and subconsciously reinforces segregation. Disabilities, I understand labeling for, but race? It's the same way Brixton is known as the black part of London. To have a part of London be mostly one race is, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think something to be proud of. It's a temporary and clumsy fix. Seeing people protesting on both the U.S. and in the U.K., I wonder what the end result will be. I see no social distancing. With that many people all together, they could easily spread the virus. Some will say it's about race, not the virus, yet they forget that ironically the epidemic, like we should, does not discriminate against color. Doesn't matter who you are and where you come from. It's indifferent toward protests or injustice. All it cares about is infecting. A message needs to be given out, but not through looting, vandalizing, or any other violence, but by listening to everyone, and in safe conditions, not all together in one place. If it goes back to what I said at the beginning, your president and Black Lives Matter are very good at reacting, but they're not very good at listening to one another. I know people I feel I don't have a leg to stand on because I'm white, but I'll listen. I just expect others to listen to me instead of being a hive mind mentality. The only way we can grow and the only way to have a way forward is by listening to each other. Political attacking each other's political race or a race or political side is never the way forwards. Kind regards, Pedro. Interesting letter, Pedro. Again, I have to say, the experience of race in the UK is different. I mean, obviously, I remember there's a movie that came out called My Beautiful Laundrette, and it dealt with the racism in the UK against the Pakistani community. And I remember watching this movie, and I, as an American, I don't think I'd ever heard of racism against the Pakistani community, simply because when I was growing up in Seattle, we really didn't have a Pakistani community, and I completely wasn't aware of it. And I had no idea that was going on in London. And of course, the UK and what happened in the British Isles in terms of slavery was very different than what happened in America. And so, wherever you go, everybody's experience of race and is different. And like you said, when you have different immigrant communities coming, and you have to, if you're an immigrant and you're coming to another country, you're going to go where other immigrants like you are. that understand who you are, that speak your language, that make your food. And it makes sense. So then you get groups of people, groups of immigrants that come to different countries, and they congregate in one place because they want to find people like them because they've immigrated. I mean, think about it. Takes courage to immigrate and come somewhere new. And so that's how we have, obviously, Los Angeles is full of huge immigrant communities. Yeah, but I mean, I think ultimately, it all comes down to not just listening to each other, but I mean, respecting one another. And, I've often used Hollywood. I've often held a film set up as an example of something that's gratifying because it represents, there's people from the top 1% on a film set, and there's the most blue collar of blue collar workers. And everybody is working together for a goal. And all the experiences that I've had, I have never had a bad experience on a film set working with people. Never, not once. I don't think I've ever seen, and when I was covering film sets, when I was on the set of movies, like X-Men 2 or like Chronicles of Narnia or Superman Returns or any of these large, I mean, I'm sure there's people that hated each other, but running around with a camera as a documentarian, I never really saw it. And I often thought that, wow, isn't it interesting? There's so many different disciplines and backgrounds that are needed to make a movie. It would be interesting to see more of this happen on a bigger scale, because as I've said before, I think when people get together, it doesn't matter what your racial background, your ethnic background, whatever, however you identify in terms of your gender or your sexuality. I think what's always fun is to get all different kinds of people together to work on a project. And you need that diversity in order for the project to be the best it's going to be. I mean, if people who all had one point of view working on films, they wouldn't be good. You need people, I mean, look, artists, look at how crazy artists are. Artists are nuts, and everyone, and most artists are what would be called liberal because they have to be. Being liberal means you're open to new ideas, new things, and artists are constantly looking for new things and new ways to see the world. So, yeah, the reason people, Hollywood's a liberal bubble, or Hollywood, you Hollywood elites. Well, there's lots of people that work in Hollywood that I wouldn't consider to be elites. But there's a lot of liberals here because there's a lot of crazy artists, and you need those crazy artists to get together to work on movies. And you need crazy artists that come from diverse backgrounds, all kinds of diverse backgrounds. You need people that have gender identities that might not be the norm. You need people that are from all kinds of ethnic backgrounds to bring their perspective to the projects. You need these things. And that's why I like working on movies, is because throughout my career, I've always worked with lots of crazy, awesome people. And it's that craziness, it's that diversity, it's those voices that are bringing what they have to say to projects. And it's all of that. And of course, that's why you need a good director, because a director is corralling all those crazy voices and utilizing. A good director and a good producer see all these crazy people in a sea of talent, and they okay, we're going to put these bunch of people together because they know that collective craziness, but controlled underneath a vision and understanding because look, if you let craziness run amok, you'll never make your days, you'll never finish. So you need strong producers, and you need a strong director, you need a strong visionary to corral all of this crazy energy that's coming around and utilize it in a nice direction. And I've always thought that'd be cool. We need more of that in general in our societies. I think we'd be better off. I think if anything, diversity of all kinds is what makes whatever we're trying to accomplish better. Hearing from one side or one kind of person, you're going to limit yourself. You're not going to allow. But I want to thank you for writing in from the UK. Interesting. Well, speaking of the UK, Nigel. Now, here's a prejudice I might have. I just assume anyone who's named Nigel is from the UK. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but Nigel Lowry's here. Hi, Rob. Greetings from the UK. See, I've got my own stereotypes in my head, and Nigel is one of them. And Nigel Lowry says, greetings from the UK. No doubt you're growing tired of discussing that post and its fallout, but I would like to add my support that is offered by so many other Post-Geek Singularity members. You've become a daily presence in my life during lockdown, and I was generally relieved you did not quit making shows. There are many online commentators, but most of them are negative, aggressive, and agenda-driven, so I want to say how much I appreciate the positive tone and environment you have consciously fostered. We're all glad to see you continue and provide a positive experience even when covering unfortunate topics. Having said that, the recent news that DC Comics is pulling away from Diamond has spurred me to finally write about a subject I've been pondering for a while. AT&T are known to be cutthroat, and pulling away is self-serving, somewhat petulant, and unconcerned with the effect their actions have on the industry marketplace. This move has already been cited as probably affecting retailers and imploding the direct sale marketplace. My own comic retailer has pointed out that dealing with DC's new US-based distributor may lead to a 100% price increase on their product outside the US. Yeesh. This will no doubt lead to competitors filling the vacuum where DC sales used to be, as to why pick up an issue of Justice League when it's twice as expensive as Avengers with no tangible benefit from the price hike. The industry was sinking in the 70s, but saved by the direct market in the short term until the post-speculator boom of the 90s nearly killed the industry again. With sales, excuse me, with sales never recovering from their previous sales or ubiquity. Comics exist all over the world, but the U.S. industry is again facing an existential threat. It will be such a loss if comics die, and I would like to talk about what comics have meant to me. My earliest memory is of being 4 or 5, around 1976, and walking into my grandparents' house to discover a stack of Marvel UK comics, such as The Avengers and The Mighty World of Marvel. Marvel UK titles at the time were weekly black and white magazine-sized anthologies, similar in format to the US Marvel black and white titles, but with half the page count. I couldn't read at the time, but loved the comics, engaged by the exciting characters and somewhat freaked out occasionally. The cyborg gorillas and the Planet of the Apes strips, and Doctor Strange's Frank Bruner-drawn sojourn to the bottom of the sleep, to discovering a sleeping Lovecraftian entity. Full-page ads for a comic called The Superheroes featured the original X-Men, and their matched uniforms became the standard concept of what superheroes look like to my childhood mind. The huge headshot of Cyclops has made him my favorite character ever since, as well as developing a fondness for many superhero costumes featuring goggles. Sometime later, my dad brought me home my first U.S. comic, an issue of Justice League that sparked my mind like nothing else before. In full color and with a cover banner of headshots of the team, I was dragged into the comic. Even the ads burned themselves into my mind. Still unable to read, the ads for famous first editions of Captain Marvel and the original Flash again became superheroic templates for me. Mine was a fairly isolated childhood with no siblings or local friends at the time, and anxiety issues even then that made it hard for me to assimilate into school. But I loved to draw, and comics became an inspiration. I started drawing characters from comics, and I still remember drawing Superman at the table. Hitting a bump and accidentally creating a deltoid muscle, I had discovered how to draw muscles. Due to various issues, I missed quite a bit of school in the UK equivalent of the 2nd grade, so my education was lagging. But I was, for some reason, afforded a lot of time to draw at school, and I soon became the best artist in my class. Comics continued to be around at home. UK comics were divided into boys and girls weeklies, as well as the numerous humor anthologies such as Beano, Dandy, and Whizzer and Chips, which were of interest to both audiences, but not to me. The ubiquitous boys' war and sports comics left me uninterested. I didn't like the art, and they just seemed dull and tame compared to the Marvel reprints. Even sci-fi comics such as Star-Lord in 2000 AD left me cold. What? Though I enjoyed Strontium Dog and Judge Dredd. Did you ever read DR and Quinch? I have vague recollections of Tarzan and Disney comics floating around, but it was always the Marvel titles UK that I begged for. The launches of the Captain Britain and Star Wars comics were huge deals, and by this time, comics were helping me learn to read more than anything at school. By age 10, my reading level had passed to one of the highest in my class. Around 1978 and 79, I started being able to afford my own comics and started picking up U.S. comics again with Justice League and Brave and the Bold. Due to sporadic distribution, Marvel and DC titles were sold together, but finding any 2 consecutive issues was impossible. Purchases were picked based on the most appealing covers I used to pour over my stack of random issues, even fixating on the Marvel corner box art or colors of the DC Bullet. My favorite publisher would seesaw between Marvel and DC for a while before becoming more of a Marvel fan. The Marvel Universe was relatively new at the time, and with a mix of US editions and UK reprints of new and older titles, getting a real sense of Marvel Universe history was addictive and easy. Editorial footnotes guiding you to previous stories that were read in any kind of order. The tangled cohesion of Marvel became so much more immersive than DC's history, which was longer, less available, and spread across various continuities, though I loved and was never confused about multiple Earths. The JSA was the coolest thing when I first discovered them, though part of that was rediscovering and finally identifying characters such as Jay Garrick, Power Girl, and Dr. Fate, who I previously could only ponder about when looking at DC ads which were unavailable to my childhood self. Eventually, comics kind of phased out for me after the Marvel UK reprints of the Burnett X-Men to the point ended, but sometime later in secondary school, a fellow classmate identified my bored classroom doodle of Shang-Chi, and he introduced me to comics. Spider-Man now had a black costume, Robin was Nightwing, and things seemed exciting, and I fell back in harder than I ever have before and never left since. This was the mid-'80s, the era of unbelievable cinematic offerings. Seriously, the '80s must be full of more crowd-pleasing, imaginative movies than any other decade, but also great change in the comics industry. The direct market started to take over, limited series took off and showcased established and new and Marvel DC concepts. Independent publishers like Eclipse, First, Pacific, and Dark Horse popped up. There was the black and white era, as well as the introduction of diverse formats, trade paperbacks, collections, magazine-sized graphic novels, hardcover graphic novels, DC's Mando, Prestige, and new formats, and so much more. That's when I got back in, too. There was also the British invasion and the start of manga coming into the market with Akira, Mai the Psychic Girl, and Lone Wolf and Cub. Man, I love Mai the Psychic Girl. I wish somebody, the rock band Sparks, was going to do an adaptation of Mai the Psychic Girl. And I would love to know the story about why that didn't happen. So somebody get on that. The 80s brought an explosion to the market, but by the mid-90s, things had changed drastically. The industry nearly collapsed after the speculation boom, and mainstream comics seemed to sag under a barrage of gimmick covers, poorly drawn artwork, and misjudged extreme makeovers. I'm with you right there. By the early 2000s, I still love comics, but Marvel and DC had creatively corrupted almost every childhood character I had loved, so that I had no general interest in any new fare the 2 big publishers put up. My interest shifted instead to following new and hunting down previous work by favorite artists. There's been a boom in books and magazines about comic history, as well as reprints of vintage and foreign material. I have an entire shelf of deluxe collections devoted to work by Frazetta, Wally Wood, Al Williamson, Adam Hughes, Brian Boland, and Dave Stevens, as you should, sir. Comics have also entered the mainstream consciousness as they become commercially successful beyond the printed page, and of course, money talks. And comic IP has become accepted even if the comics themselves are seen as peripheral. I used to buy most comic movies and the slow trickle of related documentaries on DVD, even releasing a self-published book following every comic book adaptation, but the deluge of sheer volume of material means I mainly just buy the Marvel Blu-rays right now. Avengers Endgame remains my favorite movie experience ever. I took the day off work as I had a private box to watch it at the cinema, and I was emotionally battered at the end. Not because of the major heroic death, but the whole thing, peppered with Easter eggs and callbacks, but I mentally broke down during the Avengers Assemble charge. Trying to take it all in, there was so much going on with so much emotion watching these characters that have lived in my head since before I could read. I literally wept a manly single tear. I'm getting all chills. I'm chilled reading this because I'm feeling what it was like to watch that movie myself. I literally wept a manly single tear as my mind could not process it all and I could only react emotionally. Technically, Endgame is not the best Marvel movie, but it remains the most emotionally rewarding movie experience of my life. People accept stories told with text or in pictures, but have traditionally looked down on comics, viewing them as infantile and juvenile after the Wordham witch hunts neutered a medium which had its own unique storytelling advantages over new novels and TV or movies. Movies have tried twice to tell the Dark Phoenix saga and never come as close as the original comics. Maybe a Disney Plus series might be the way to go to have that story best told like they did so perfectly in 79 and 80. How cool would it actually be to see the X-Men take on even half the Shi'ar Imperial Guard in live action? Let me tell you, son, it would be dope, Nigel. Sadly, although I buy the occasional Marvel or DC comics, I don't follow any regularly, though possibly I would if not for the price. Space and finance means I have to pick my purchases, and I can still usually find enough items to order from previews each month. I have so many favorite artists, but some include Dave Stevens, Adam Hughes, Wally Wood, Al Williamson, Mark Schultz, Steve Rude, Frank Cho, Colleen Duran, Jerry Ordway, Brian Bolin, Pete Craig Russell. My favorite superheroes remain Claremont's X-Men, the Wolfman Perez New Teen Titans, absolutely one of my favorites, the Levitz Giffen Little Legion of Superheroes, which is awesome, and Peter David's Hulk. Other favorite runs include Lock and Key, Bone, A Distant Soil, Preacher, Jamie Hernandez's Love and Rockets, the many works of Alan Moore, and James Robinson's Starman, which is more than just a superhero series. I apologize for the rambling nature of this letter. Its length has been why I've been holding off writing for so long, and I've kind of lost my point. But it was I love comics. The medium itself, the art, the imagination, the seductive nature of deluxe editions of superior work, the love of characters that live in the minds and become well known as friends and family members. There are comics outside the U.S. market, but it would be such a devastating loss if the virus and lack of support from AT&T finally brings the mainstream market down. Thanks for your time and patience. Excelsior, Nigel. Well, Nigel, that was an epic letter. You know who would have loved that letter is John Schnepp would have loved that letter. He would have loved that letter. And thank you for writing in. And it's what a great letter. This one comes from Duncan Norris. Dear Rob, this is somewhat unusual for me. I've watched you for a number of years, and I think and feel of you as some part of me as your friend. Obviously, though, this is not actually the case. So I'm in the position of wanting to give observations and hopefully help as I would one of my friends. But in reality, I would just be a stranger who is about to give an unsolicited piece of advice to another person. Hence, I thought I would first send this email and say, hey, Rob, we are folks with much in common in many ways, and I have a few observations that I think are important enough that I would like to share with you and that I believe might be helpful to hear. If you would like to hear them, please just email back yes or some such thing, and I'll send them. Well, Duncan, I'm saying yes. I would like to hear whatever you have to say to me. And if you want to send it to me like you did this letter and not have me read it on the air, just say, please, Rob, do not read this letter on the air. And that's for anybody who wants to send me a letter. If you don't want me to share letters on the air, I will read them, but please say, don't read this on the air. And try and do that up front and not in the body of the letter. But yes, I would like to hear them. Anyhow, everything else notwithstanding, I really enjoy your show. I enjoy you as a person, and I wish you nothing but happiness and success in these troubled times. Sincerely, Duncan. So yes, Duncan, send in those letters. Let's see. This one comes from, and I'm going to read this one letter. I got a lot more, but I'll read this letter and jump over to your comments. Hi, Rob. You may want to prune this letter a bit. Maybe it's a bit long, or maybe it touches on some subjects you're getting tired of, but I leave that up to you. You've been warned. I ramble. I have a movie story to tell you, but before I get to that, I want to say that I've been seeing what you've been going through, and it's been absolutely infuriating. I sent you a message on Twitter as soon as I heard about what happened, but since then I've seen your coworkers jump on you in a way that makes my blood boil. Like I mentioned in my first letter to you, I discovered you through Schnepp's AMC Heroes. Because of that, I was watching Collider for a good while, even after Campius started up on his own again. So I've been somewhat familiar with the people who are now coming after you. And while I can't say I'm very surprised that they're taking part in the big ol' cancel Olympics, I'm absolutely appalled that they would go after someone like you. Now, I don't know you personally when it comes to internet personalities. I think you are easily one of the most genuine people I've ever had the pleasure of watching. Your passion for true equality is so strong that seeing people come after you, of all people, in the name of fighting injustice, prejudice, racism, or whatever nonsense they want to call it, is so ignorant that had I not already experienced this culture firsthand for myself, seeing this would have been completely earth-shattering. I have in no way had run-ins with this on the scale of yours, though, and I've been labeled with pretty much every word in the book by people I previously considered to be good friends. An interestingly large majority of these people come from the U.S., and weirdly enough, they all claim to be progressives on the left, and they've always seen me as being way, way further to the right than they are. This is somewhat ironic, because as I mentioned in my last little letter, I'm Norwegian. Here in Norway, it's generally agreed upon that politically, we're all pretty much to the left of the politics in the U.S., with a few parties that fall a bit more towards the conservative end. I, however, happen to be a voter for a party that openly brands itself socialist. I'm considered far left in Norway. I don't know what that makes me in the context of American politics, but according to a very specific brand of progressives, it seems to land me somewhere towards the absolute most extreme conservative end of the spectrum. I find that a little funny. I'm not going to go on about this for too much longer because I actually have some movie stuff I want to talk about, but I really wanted to make this point. What you are doing in response to all of this is nothing short of spectacularly respectable. Your message of unity and dialogue is the absolute worst enemy of this scarily influential Hollywood cult. And while it will undoubtedly make you a bigger target for some, when it is all said and done, it will be because of people like you that we do not see this devolve into something more terrifying. And mad props to you for that. And here's to hoping these people find a way to snap out of this cult eventually. And it is a cult. There's no more fitting word for it. I wrote more than I intended to on this subject, so if you want to cut this letter short here in favor of time, I can resend the next part of this letter for later, but it's up to you. If you want some movie talk, let's get into it. Yes, I do. You see, I recently discovered a new addition to my list of favorite movies. This is why I love this show, man. This is why I love this show. I don't have a lot of them, and the ones I do call my favorite are not always the most impressive movies, but rather films that I have some sort of personal connection to. This time, that connection ended up being the writing of fiction itself, which has been a weird experience. The movie was recommended to me by a friend who had just read a short story I had recently written. It is called The Man Who Was Chomsky, and it is an account of a man named Noel Chomsky who is completely convinced that he is actually famous author and linguist Noam Chomsky. Noel isn't a completely normal guy, and he spends his time wondering why the publicist isn't getting his name right on his books. I'm about to spoil my own story, but it's not like anyone will ever read the story anyway. The reason Noel thinks he is Noam is revealed to be in an office drawer. You see, Noel keeps finding Noam's writings in his own drawer, and his natural conclusion to this is that he must be Noam. That is, of course, a ridiculous notion. You see, the drawer in Noel's office happens to share the physical space with the drawer in Noam's office, a drawer-specific wormhole. The story concludes with the two having a short conversation through their open drawers, which convinces Noel that Noam is just an inner voice, an alternate personality that is finally revealed to be him. Now, this story is no prize winner. It's just a little story I had fun writing one night. But like I said, it reminded my friend of a movie that he would then recommend to me. Oh, I can. You probably can't guess what movie I'm talking about. It really isn't that similar to my story, but it was certainly enough for me to make a connection. Being John Malkovich. Just so you know, when you first started describing your story, in my mind, I'm like, that's Being John Malkovich. And I really, people might say, oh, come on. Oh, I did know that. I own Being John Malkovich on Blu-ray. I'm a big fan of that movie. It came out similar. It came out close to Free Enterprise, so it was frequently mentioned when you had a John Malkovich playing himself, as Shatner played himself in Free Enterprise. Being John Malkovich is a movie I can't believe I'd never heard about before. It's right down my alley, of course, but it touches on such an odd idea I couldn't help but relate that to my own idea. Here you have a guy who finds a tunnel in his office that leads inside the head of famous actor John Malkovich. What a lovable movie. I adored it. Maybe the acid had something to do with it, but it has been a long time since I made such a weird personal connection with the movie. It made me feel as if the screenplay writer Charlie Kaufman had discovered the same weird mental space that I found in myself when I wrote my story, and I think just feeling this made me appreciate the movie in a way I don't think I would have without that experience. I feel greedy for taking up so much space on your show, Rob. Sorry about that. Have you ever had a similar personal experience with movies or other forms of fiction that is so unique to you that you had to write more than a half page's worth of text just to explain it to someone? And what about the movie? Are you a fan or maybe have any recommendations of similarly wacky rides? I'm sorry again for everything that has been happening to you. I hope this doesn't go any further than it already has. But either way, I love the way you're handling it. Much love to yours, and not to mention the community. Robin, P.S. You asked about my YouTube nick nickname on your show the other day. Bogrosh is a name, but not a real one. It's something I named a fictional character as a child. I think I chose Bogrosh because my non-English speaking brain, well, it sounded like an American name, and that made it cool. Bogrosh, the American, coming soon to a theater near you. I love that. Well, Robin, what a great letter. Again, thanks for writing in all the way from Norway. Look, I haven't been all over the world, but I've traveled some. I've lived in various other parts of the world that are very different than the United States. And one of the things we as Americans, I think, forget is we forget about the rest of the world. And there's all kinds of different stuff and different perceptions of the world than we have in America. And unfortunately, unlike Europe, which you can get on a train in Europe, and in a couple hours you're in a different country with a whole different religion or dominant religion, or a language or a tradition. It's and so people are used to that. And I think that and I think because Europe is much older than America, there's more of a tolerance and understanding of what it means to be human. At least that's how I've always felt when I've spent any time in Europe. That could be my own perception of being an American. But so when you do get into these conversations, like you said, with people that think that you're incredibly, I think that a lot of the time, especially people that might not, maybe amongst younger people, they just haven't had the experience yet. And I think that as people move through their lives, they learn things, they grow, they change, they travel, they experience the world in ways they hadn't before. And that can only change your perception. The more people that you meet, the more places that you go, you're only going to have a different and I think better experience of the world. So I do want to absolutely thank you for writing in that letter. I think that's great. And yeah, I love being John Malkovich. And the fact that Charlie Kaufman was able to pull off that, I haven't had an experience like that necessarily, but there are movies that I profoundly relate to for various reasons. And two of those movies off the top of my head are Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous, especially the longer untitled director's cut of that film that's on Blu-ray, and Amélie. I really, when I saw Amélie, I saw it in Sitges. I was in Spain at the Sitges Film Festival that's just outside of Barcelona. Sitges is a beautiful little Mediterranean town, and that's where Free Enterprise actually had its world premiere, but I was there in 2001 just to hang out, and I went to the festival there. And I saw Amélie, and there was something about the worldview presented in that movie, and when Amélie Poulain's understanding of the joy of existence, there were two moments in there that hit me on a very powerful emotional level. There was the moment when Amélie has found the box full of childhood delights hidden away in her own apartment, and she goes to find the man it belongs to, and she decides if he has a response to it, then she's going to become a do-gooder. I don't know why, but that hit me to the very core. Like, I could not, when the man, she leaves it in a phone booth, and when the man finds the box and opens it up, and his emotional response, just because I collect things and I have so many things from my childhood, I know what that would mean to me. And watching the reaction, and the fact that Jean-Pierre Jeunet made a movie that had a scene like that in it. I was sitting in the theater. I was sitting next to my friend Steve Melching, and tears were just streaming down my face. And it wasn't sad. It was just something I related to. And then there was another moment in the movie where the man of glass, her neighbor, she's made a video cassette. He can't go out of his house. And she's made a video cassette of him of just random images of the wonderful, wacky, zany, day-to-day life of human beings. Just these crazy things that happen that are delightful, that aren't, it's not gigantic things, but they're everyday moments. They might have been taken from sports or children or something, but just these everyday moments that she's put together for him and left on a video cassette. And I was like, the sensibility behind this movie Of all the movies I've ever seen in my life, the whole film just appealed to me on that level. And it's interesting because that wasn't necessarily normally. And I went and saw Amélie because it was Jean-Pierre Jeunet, not because he'd made Alien Resurrection, but because he had made Delicatessen and City of Lost Children with Mark Caro. And I was a fan of his. I had no idea. And it was interesting when I was in Spain, when you go to the Sitges Film Festival at night, if you're not seeing movies, or during the day, you go to Barcelona and you take the train. There was Amélie posters everywhere. And it was just her face. And I didn't know anything about the movie. And when I sat down to see it, I'm like, this is great because it's sight unseen. I had no idea. And I could tell from the way the story was told with voiceover and the imagery, I'm like, oh my God, this movie was made just for me. And it's interesting because my girlfriend Elizabeth bonded on that. That's how, when she said like her favorite movie it was Amélie, I was like, oh, okay. So that there was a kindred sensibility there, that it was unspoken, that you'd have to understand. And so so that's the thing that jumps to mind. You asked the question, that's what I was thinking about. So there's a lot of people here that have been sending me tips or super chats, and let me get to those. Dancing Dog, longtime watcher of this show. Greetings, Robert. I love your show and support you wholeheartedly. I know your heart is in the right place. I see that you try and see the good in everyone, and that makes you a better person. I try and do the same and continue to ask and to listen. Yes, things have to change systematically. You are correct. I can't imagine being denied living in a certain neighborhood, or being followed by an officer or a vigilante, or being assumed that I was up to no good because of my skin color. Almost 60 years of... Hang on, let me make sure I'm not screwing... Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Let me get here so you can actually see what it is I am reading. Switch over here. I can't imagine being denied living in a certain neighborhood, or being followed by an officer or a vigilante, or being assumed I was up to no good because of my skin color. At almost 60 years of age, I've seen a lot. Protesting isn't rioting. Some in the media and some posters here have tried to make the two the same. They're not the same. Silly. Grow up, open your minds, listen, embrace our diversity. It makes us stronger when we do. I totally agree. Dancing Dog goes on to say, I do disagree with the Fandom Menace members who are anti-diversity. They can live in the 1950s, but as time moves on, with or without them. They can choose to live in a Leave It to Beaver fantasy world, or live in a real one. It's a free country. And for you post-geeks across the pond who don't really understand systemic racism in America, listen to an African American. Put down your defensive stance. Listen with an open mind, not whataboutism. Listen. Walk in another man's shoes. That's all I have to say about that. Now back to movies, comic books, and other wonderfully geeky things that hopefully bring us all together. Robert, you rock. Dancing Dog. Well, Dancing Dog, thank you for that. Thank you for saying that. I very much appreciate that. Jeremy Tishabasu is here and sends in a super chat and says, shout outs to Omar, Vesna, Paula, Willow, Ronnie, Larry, Eyes, Eduardo, Joseph, GMAT, Bill 4393, Bill B, Muckbong, Stubble, Claude, Mods, and yourself, R&B. Well, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Love to the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity. Y'all are awesome. Well, thank you. David Crabtree is here. David Crabtree, USMC, also a very talented artist. David has been sharing with me. He's been working on his own comic book, and it's got Marvel Comics, Transformers vibe to it. I really like the way it looks. It's got this sort of 80s thing going on. It's great work, and I appreciate that, David, you've been sending it to me. David's done some great fan art of me and John Campia. But again, I love seeing when someone like David is doing their own work, creating his own comic books and his own legacy, and I think it's awesome. David says, hello, Robert. So I checked out the HBO Max Looney Tunes cartoons. They do a good job of capturing the tone and look of the originals, but the writing just isn't as sharp or funny, and they got rid of Elmer Fudd's gun. He's a hunter, for the love of Pete. Yes, I read about this. I read about how in the new Looney Tunes that Elmer Fudd no longer has a gun. Normally you might hear me say, God damn it, Elmer Fudd needs his gun. But the way firearms were used in Looney Tunes cartoons might not be such the great, remember the extreme violence in those cartoons. I do think that we used to live in a society, especially, a society that, had tens of millions of people dying all over the world during World War II, we were a little bit more, I think, discerning in terms of understanding the difference between reality and fantasy. It was just assumed that we could do that. But now we live in a world where, unfortunately, my crisis medicine series is needed. The fact that anybody would have thought, back in those days, were there school shootings? So I really do understand the impulse. We have proven we are not mature enough to have Looney Tunes cartoons anymore. Or maybe we've proven that we needed to grow up and evolve so we can't have those kinds of things anymore. It's interesting. So a real fun throwback recommendation that really has been hard to find online. Before there was Pacific Rim, there was Robot Jox. I quite enjoyed this 1990 film as a kid. It's pure schlocky fun. Robot Jox is a hoot. It stars Gary Graham, who I worked with on the Axanar project when I was involved with that. And it was produced by Charlie Band, and Stuart Gordon directed it. That's right, Stuart Gordon of Reanimator fame. So I'm a fan. Willow says, I've forgotten about In the Heat of the Night until someone mentioned it the other day. I didn't love the movie the first time I watched it due to the changes made from the novel, but now I've come to like it much more now. They call me Mr. Tibbs. I mean, yeah, again, In the Heat of the Night, talk about a great cop movie. Would you want to live in a world where In the Heat of the Night was somehow canceled? I wouldn't. I mean, I think that's really, really important. In the Heat of the Night is another great cop story. It's another great story that talks about race in America, and it's a story about humanity. And I think it's great. The Great One sends in a tip and says, "Hi Rob, I liked Julius's list of female versions of Stand By Your Man. I'd like to suggest Springsteen's Red-Headed Woman as a compliment to his list. Here's a link to the lyrics. Check it out." For those of you who don't know, Julius has been a new voice here at the Post-Geek Singularity, very supportive of the channel, and try to come up with the female alternative to the song "Stand By Your Man," which I thought was interesting, but that's a good one. I'll have to pass this by Elizabeth to get her final verdict. Joey75 sends in a super chat and says, "That shirt is so awesome." Oh, thank you. Everyone knows I love my geeky t-shirts. This is one of these geeky t-shirts that they show up there's lots of geeky. I've said this many times on the show, but I love Last Exit to Nowhere. I believe they're out of the UK. They're my favorite geeky shirts because, and how I found them once is I saw Simon Pegg in the pages of Geek magazine that I had written for. Simon Pegg was wearing a WGON shirt, and WGON it was the logo of the TV station from George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which is one of my favorite movies. And he was wearing it in this photo shoot, and I was like, I couldn't believe that somebody made a WGON t-shirt. And I was like, okay, because it was such a deep cut and not many people would know what it is. I felt that, okay, somebody's clearly parking their shuttlecrafts in my shuttle bay, because the fact that somebody even made that shirt, I was like, I gotta have that. And so I have to tell you, since you brought it up, here's Robservations, my way of thinking. I never liked, even when I was a kid, I mean, I would wear them. You'd get like a yellow t-shirt that had an iron-on patch that would be like Star Wars, and it'd be that famous picture of Han and Chewie, coming forward. I always hated that kind of shit. I always hated shirts that said Star Trek, and you had Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Dr. McCoy. I mean, to me, that was so obvious, and like, they weren't clever. Like, I know I would much rather wear a shirt that I thought was neat. And there was always character shirts. There wasn't anything there. And this went on for a long, long time. And in the social media era, and when people started doing things like memes and all that, like when the internet started, the cleverness started to bubble up. And when I saw that somebody made a Dawn of the Dead, I love the fact that nobody would know what it was. It was so obscure, and it's on the side of the helicopter. You see it in the side of the helicopter, Steven's helicopter in Dawn of the Dead. That it was the thought process behind somebody who said, "I'm going to make a T-shirt of that logo," And I'm like, oh my God. And I became obsessed with the idea of doing that. So Last Exit to Nowhere makes all of these geeky shirts that are logos from companies that don't exist, like Skynet and Cyberdyne Systems and HAL 9000 and, all this stuff from movies. So when you wear the shirts, they're cool enough that people who know, so they can acknowledge you. They're great to wear to like Comic-Con or any convention. You're wearing these shirts that it immediately, look, can really, I mean, when you really think about it, somebody pointed out that I'm an old man who can an old man wear a geeky t-shirt and pull it off? I don't know. Like I'm gonna be the first person to venture into this galaxy where I'm making movies in the industry, being an online pundit, talking on YouTube, and having an audience that's 30 years younger than me. Clearly, some of them don't appreciate my brand, but others, I'm gonna move into this realm and I'm not gonna change. So when I saw this shirt, and for those of you who can't tell what this is Sean Young as Rachel from Blade Runner. Now, it doesn't say Blade Runner on it, and somebody with a great sense of graphic design clearly made this. So I'm like, oh, I have to have that. And it was like, click. So those are the shirts. And now there's a lot of these geeky shirts. I don't know where suddenly the proliferation of them came from, but there's a lot of them. And I've been buying a lot of them I know they're unlicensed, but, I don't think anybody, if you tried to submit this shirt to like the licensing department of Warner Brothers or whoever, they'd be like, why do you want to make that shirt? I actually produced, here's a little bit of trivia for you. I've talked about this on the show. Back in I want to say it was in the 90s, my friend Sean Fanning, who has subsequently passed away, Patrick Van Horn plays him in the movie Free Enterprise. We wanted to make a series of Star Trek shirts that we could wear to clubs. Like because we always went out at night, we clubbed a lot and partied a lot, went out in Los Angeles nightlife. We were there, and we wanted to make some shirts that we could wear. So we wanted to make these what we called hipster. They were hipster Star Trek shirts, and the first shirt we made was William Wyndham from the Doomsday Machine. And if you know the episode The Doomsday Machine, they find the Starship Constellation, which is a heavy cruiser like the Enterprise, just wrecked by the Doomsday Machine. And they find Commodore Matt Decker, played by William Wyndham, and they're trying to get him he's trying to recount what's happened to, where's his crew, Matt, where's your crew? And it's such great acting. I mean, it's so over the top, but it's such great acting. William Wyndham as Matt Decker, he's like, they're on the third planet. There is no third planet. And he's like, don't you think I know that? There was, but not anymore. They called me, they begged me, 400 of them. So we took this image of William Wyndham at his most when he has his hands up, and so that was the image on the shirt. And then in the classic Star Trek font, it just said, there was, but not anymore. And that's all that was on the shirt. It didn't acknowledge it was a Star Trek shirt, and he did a stylization of Matt Decker's face. And then we did a few more, and we called a little clothing label. It was going to be called, it was called Pike's Place Orion Slave Wear. And it had the Orion slave girl, and Vina was the Orion slave girl from the episode, the Cage and the Menagerie. And the ad line was, nice place you got here, Mr. Pike. So you had to be a Star Trek fan to sort of get that reference of what it was, because there was Orion slavers that would sell. They trafficked in the green animal women, which you can't call them a green Orion slave girl anymore. You have to she's now a green Orion animal woman. So we made that shirt, and then we made a shirt of a phaser, like it was a Star Trek phaser, and it just said Type 2. Because that's a phaser, you have Type 1. So we made a couple of those shirts. We submitted them to the Star Trek fan club, the official Star Trek fan club. And they took them. They had to get approved by Paramount, and they were actually approved. They became licensed products, Star Trek products, and they were in the magazine. You could get them through no one bought them. Nobody bought our shirts. Even Star Trek fans like, what the hell is this? So sometimes I guess you can be too clever for your own good, or perhaps not clever enough. But yeah, that's where so that's the story of my t-shirt in a roundabout way. Hey, Rob, I just wrote in to say that for those of you who haven't seen it, the international cut of Rambo Last Blood is currently streaming for free for U.S. Prime members. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day. That's from Honest Asian Guy. I did not know that. I have not seen that version of Rambo. I'd love to check that out. Hapkido Locke says, the Burnettwork, easy, Cheetah. No one should cling to a straw man. The article is calling for reflection upon the notion of whitewashing Leo in a largely unquestioning dramatic light in response to empty network rhetoric virtue signaling. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I find it strange to me that now we're in a world where some voices you have to listen to and some voices you don't. Gabe Bologna, the director of Tango Shalom, once saw me reading the Drudge Report, which is, if you don't know what the Drudge Report is, it's definitely a right-leaning aggregate of information. Some of it's good, some of it's not. But I always go to the Drudge Report to see what they're reporting on and read articles, just like I go to CNN, the BBC, and a bunch of other places, whether it's Medium or Quillette, or there's all these places that I skip around every day on the internet looking for interesting things to talk about. But I like to get a different perspective, all perspectives, like what's out there. And I just thought everybody did that. Like I never really understood that people I only watch Fox News. I'm like, well, why? Like I don't just watch CNN or MSNBC or the BBC or whomever. I mean, I watch a bunch of things. And I watch people that I know that I hate, but I want to hear what they have to say so I can understand, like, okay, here's where people are coming from, because a lot of the time I don't. I just assumed people did that. Apparently they don't. Certainly don't do it as much as I would have thought. JPRPH1 says, hey, old Rob, cheers to you and Elizabeth and the pooches. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that. I will tell the pooches and Elizabeth. Stubble McShave says, conflict is the engine that drives the storytelling. If you take out the conflict, you kill the story and the show. You kill the story. Feature the problems of society in the story and show how that affects people without beating us in the face with the messaging. But have it be self-evident. Look, I totally agree. Roberto Suarez. Roberto, how are you, sir? Roberto sends in a tip and says, I just wanted to recognize that today is National Cancer Survivors Day. I'm a survivor of testicular cancer going on 23 years remission. Let's take a moment to honor all the survivors and remember those we have lost to this terrible illness. Roberto, once again, I'm right there with you. I've talked about it on the show. My mom, who's been on the show, my 81-year-old mother, survived 2 bouts of breast cancer in over a 3.5-year space of time. She had both of her breasts removed and had a radical mastectomy, which is why I bought this. I actually bought this to support breast cancer research. People have asked, why do I have a pink Darth Vader? People have thought it might be for LGBTQ reasons. It could be that too. But I specifically bought this because of breast cancer. And, it's funny. I got it for my mom, and she said that perhaps I should take it and remember her. So I have, and that's why I keep it up here all the time. So my mom is still here, obviously. I just remember her, what she went through. She was a warrior at that time. So, Roberto, I'm glad you're still here. I have another friend who recently, a couple years back, went through a bout of testicular cancer the same way, and he is fine now. So it's nice to hear that you are going on 23 years of remission. I'm sure you're going to be here for another 23 years because you have to be here, because how can I have Zoom parties otherwise? But it's great to have you here today, sir. And by the way, Roberto has made us some cool videos. He did a cool video about ElfQuest. He also did a great video for my 400th episode on Francois Truffaut's The 400 Blows. He keeps saying he's going to send me another longer video. So look for that. Hapkido Locke sends in, would you ratio your opening few bad apples routine for me, Rob? Is it 51%, 25%, 7%, or 93%? The argument is as empty of relevancy as it is rationale. Militarized LEO abuses are clearly endemic, qualified immunity notwithstanding. Well, look, I don't know. I have no idea what that is. I don't. But I also think that, and are you talking about a few bad apples for everybody or the people of the military? We are asking members of our community, members of our country, we're asking fellow Americans to go into a profession where at any one moment they're putting themselves into harm's way. Working on motion pictures and television, I have never gone to work ever to be in a situation where I might find myself in a life-threatening situation or having to help somebody survive who has already been in a car accident or has been a victim of domestic violence. I mean, the very idea of protecting others from bad actors. When I say bad actors, that's a term that we used a lot in crisis medicine. People that would do harm to others. I can't even imagine. And I don't know what that does. I mean, look, like everything else, I think that these kinds of professions, they need more mental health. They need more health care and mental health built into them than they have. I think they're a very hard thing to deal with on a daily basis. So I'll tell you one thing. I don't think that our civilization would function without certain members of our society being there to keep the peace or keep order in some certain way. Because human beings are obviously, we're not, if we were all perfect people and we were all rational and we all were self-actualized and we all lived in a post-scarcity civilization like the Federation or something, I would say, okay, perhaps we don't have a need for some kind of group to police the rest of us. But we do. And I think, like with everything else, the money is not being spent on the kind of things that we need. Our society as a whole, talking with each other is the beginning, and I think that, let's see, who did I saw somebody speak, and I want to get this right. There is a hip hop artist named Michael Render, or he goes by Killer Mike. I saw him speaking in Atlanta, and he was on Bill Maher this week. And he was talking about the situation, and I really liked what he had to say. And how all of this is the beginning, but then action needs to be taken. It needs to be followed up with all different kinds, mobilization he talked a lot about. And I really like what he had to say. And I would suggest, if you want, go get a clip of Michael Render, a.k.a. Killer Mike. Go look at the speech he made in Atlanta, or go look at the look, if you don't like Bill Maher, I understand. But he was on Bill Maher this week speaking about what he had said in Atlanta, and I think it's definitely worth listening to. And I think that's, like, right now, like, are we just going to, like, give up our entire society and think that everybody's going to be able to live together in peace? It's interesting to me that we have, like, we all agree that we stop at stop signs. We all agree that we stop at stop lights. We all agree to a certain civil structure that the body politic has said, this is the way that we should be. And when that's not working, this kind of thing happens. And I hope, and this has happened in my lifetime, this is the second time I've seen riots in Los Angeles to the extent that we saw them recently. And the first time was in 1992, and a lot more of this city was burning down to the ground. And we got through it. But it's disheartening to see it later, 30, what is it? 28 years later, I've lived through the exact same thing for the exact same reason. Police officers were acquitted for committing a crime. There was, as they said at the time, no justice, no peace. And we're no better. 28 years later. We have a lot of work to do. And I think we have a lot of work to do on all sides, but we can't just throw away our civilization either. We have to figure out, how do we talk, how do we listen, how do we understand, and how do we evolve and move forward. And I'll tell you, the voice that I heard of Killer Mike, I was very impressed with him, very much so. Stubble McShade says, after having read the Dune script, Do you have any idea of how high the rewatchability is just based on the script? I know the script is not the finished product, but do you have a sense of the rewatchability from the tone of the script? I loved it. I love the world building. I love the language. I love the scenes. I was reading because you know who is playing the roles, and I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be great. Absolutely, I can't wait. I think the rewatchability factor is going to be high. I mean, hell, I think the rewatchability factor of David Lynch's Dune is pretty high, but that's just me. Joey R75 sends in a super chat and says, "Love you, buddy. You're always welcome in my house. All right, I'll bring the hooch." Mark C sends in a super chat and says, "Lego said they will no longer create police and fireman sets." Yeah, why not fireman sets? It's interesting. I mean, especially like the fire. If you live in Los Angeles and you've seen what kind of fire damage has been done to communities here, all the way up to Santa Barbara or whatever, and a lot of people say, "Oh, those are just the elites that they live in the hills, they can afford these homes." It's like, most of the people that I know in Hollywood that they come here to work from somewhere else, they're all self-made people. It's not like you're and our first responders and officers that especially respond during those times, or when we have earthquakes. I've also lived through the Northridge quake. You know what I often think about? This is one of the things that there was a CHP officer after the Northridge quake, and he was, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to get the actual thing that happened wrong, but there was a CHP officer that was going from what's called the 118 freeway, and he was taking an interchange and getting onto the 5 freeway from the 118. It was 4:30 in the morning. He'd probably ridden that route, his beat or whatever, a million times, and part of the section of the freeway that he was on, unbeknownst to him, had fallen. The piece just in the earthquake had fallen. He's driving at 4:30 in the morning. It's dark out still. He's ridden this bit of road a million times, and there's nobody on the road at 4 o'clock in the morning. Very few people on the road. He rode out into empty space, and he fell on his bike and killed instantly. I often think about him. He was a cop. I don't know anything about his record, but I just think about the fact that here was a man who was dedicating his life to serving the community. CHP officer probably also loved motorcycles too, and had no idea. And in the line of duty, he didn't even. No one pulled a gun on him. There was no criminal activity involved. He was just a CHP officer. And by the way, the California Highway Patrol is protecting motorists. And in the state of California, and am I saying there's been problems in law enforcement all over, but this particular guy. And I always thought about that. I couldn't, after the Northridge quake, there was the city was messed up, and I just kept thinking about him. That it was one of those things where I guess it was like having a stroke that you didn't know was going to happen, or a heart attack or something. He had no clue. And I wondered, like, the fear, and he didn't, probably was one of those things where while it was happening, he had no idea what was going on. So he had no idea that this was the last moments of his life. But I've often thought about that. So I think I don't know if getting rid of police and fire department Legos would necessarily be the right thing to do. I mean, especially if you live in a city like Los Angeles, every time you watch a movie like Training Day or Internal Affairs, you have to know that there is a lot of dedicated police and first responders, EMT, paramedics, and fire, without which this city wouldn't be standing. And I think that's always something to remember. So yeah, that's a bummer. Regis sends in a tip saying, regarding the current situation, I wanted to say to my fellow humans something I learned in my beloved Babylon 5 series. We are all Kosh. Yes, and we are Groot. Absolutely, Regis. I like that. Alexander Wilson says, I'm happy that you and RB3 talk like real men and cut the internet BS out. You know, so am I. I mean, remember, I said fuck you to RB3. Fuck you. He didn't have to sit down with me. I really appreciate that he did. Him and Winston. You know, Winston, and my only beef with Winston was our factional beef that we would have. I was looking forward to seeing the Burning Droogs move forward in the Schmodown and win. But both, actually, Winston and RB3 are both very eloquent speakers. And I really appreciated hearing their words. And they got me to shut up. It was hard, but they got me to shut up and listen to them. And I'm glad I did. And I much respect to actually both of them. Like Winston didn't have to come on that call, but he did. And it was good. The Smoke 007 sends in a super chat and says, hey, Rob, much respect to you. Did you see the Orville fan series pilot, A Planetary Step? I did not. I know I saw an ad for one. I don't know. That's interesting. I'll check it out. Alexander says, you mentioned the Fandom Menace yesterday. I remember Nerdrotic and Doomcock were saying Watchmen was racist against white people. I'm like, either this is clickbait, willful ignorance, or just being disingenuous. Miss me with that BS. I didn't feel that way at all. I mean, I thought Watchmen, if anything, Watchmen's, I think, just the opposite about that. Watchmen's a really, I mean, especially now, look, I had some problems with it, especially the fact I don't like the fact that, once again, Watchmen is taking Alan Moore's work, and people are making money off his work and his legacy. And while he said, I don't want anything, do what you want. I still think it's somehow somebody should set up the Alan Moore. I don't know. But be that as it may, I was primed to hate Watchmen. And I thought, for what it was very interesting. And it has one of the best hours of television. It's episode 6, when you delve into Hooded Justice's past and you find out, I mean, and again, Watchmen was a show that showed both good police and bad police. And it dealt with racism in the past and the Black Wall Street massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is something not a lot of people remember, nor is it talked about much. So I didn't feel that way at all. I thought it was really interesting. If anything, you could make the case that I thought a reasonably intelligent, actually a super intelligent Asian woman, for a show that does a lot for race relations in America, there was a little bit of yellow peril in Watchmen that I thought was problematic, to be honest. But other than that, Alexander Wilson says, how do you feel about Tupac? He grew up in theater. He did high school plays with Jada Pinkett Smith. He was a huge cinema fan. His first album, Tupacalypse Now, of course, was named after his favorite movie. I forget that he was only 25 when he passed, a workaholic. Well, I think Tupac was one of the great voices in hip-hop, and his loss was a huge tragedy. A huge tragedy. And I think, and that's not to take away from Biggie either. But losing them both, especially vibrant artists who were in the prime and just maybe the beginnings of their careers, was great. He was amazing. What was it? It was Poetic Justice. What a star turn that was. I mean, God knows what Tupac could have done. I mean, you look at and see, you think about people like Ice Cube or Ice-T, and they've gone on to have careers. They've done everything from, they've done cop shows, they've done gang thrillers, they've done children's family films. I mean, well, has Ice-T done a film? I don't know. But I mean, look at the kind of career when any artist's life is cut short, especially someone like Tupac. I mean, what a tragedy that is. What a senseless tragedy. Ray Holdridge sends in a super chat and says, have you seen Batman versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in a while. I've heard that. I have not seen it, but I definitely want to. People keep telling me it's good. I haven't seen it. Brian Ankbauer sends in a super chat and says, I'm sure this has been asked before, but are you a fan? Oh, Brian. Brian. Brian asks, I'm sure this has been asked before, but are you a fan of Chris Pine's JJ Star Trek trio of films? And do you think there will be more? Brian, I know that you're new here, and I want to welcome you with open arms. I do. But I need to say, I am not a fan of the last 10 years of all of Star Trek. Now, that is not to say I love Chris Pine as an actor. I love movies like Hell and High Water. But the Chris Pine and J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, not a fan of. And even my beloved Justin Lin, who directed Beyond, I was primed. If there was any time I was going to love it, because I love, as everyone knows, I love the Fast and the Furious franchise. I just can't go there. Will there be another one? I think the only way they could ever make another Star Trek movie like that is to bring down how much those films cost. I don't know if they're capable, if the Bad Robot team is capable. Certainly Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Discovery, and the Star Trek movies we've seen have been made for the most amount of money ever, and I don't know if they can survive that. I don't know if the franchise can survive that. BL Alley is here. He says, I prefer Uranus girls, and that's exactly what I said to them. I don't know about that, BL. I don't know what to say. Brandon Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, your thoughts on the movie Ghost World. Okay, first of all, I love Ghost World. Again, young Scarlett Johansson, Steve Buscemi. It's Ghost World's based on, of course, comics. I love Ghost World. I own the Blu-ray. What a great character study. It's such a fun movie, and it doesn't get mentioned a lot, but it's easily one of the best graphic novels or best comic book adaptations ever done. Love it, love it, love it. Alexander Wilson goes on. He goes on and says, a Killer Mike is an awesome rapper and person. He and Janelle Monáe were signed by Outkast in the early 2000s. That's a great eye for talent. I think Monáe is going to be the next big actress. Also, Prince was on her last album before he passed. Also, Janelle Monáe is starring in the new season of Homecoming. And while I thought the second season wasn't nearly as good as the first, she crushed it. She was great. Janelle Monáe was great. I'm a huge fan of hers. Killer Mike, I got to tell you, impressive. I had to say, I am not as familiar with his musical output, but just listening to him speak about everything, I am a fan. Killer Mike was somebody that, what a clear thinking voice that we need now in the community. I mean, I really do think it's time when you're here. We do have to shut up and listen to black voices. Now, that's not to say we'll have time. Other white voices can speak up later. But let's hear from the black community. Let's understand what the black community... There's a woman that follows me on Twitter, Ote. She sent me a video of a woman that was part of a documentary that was talking about the economics of the black community. And I thought it was spot on. She was amazing. I retweeted it. It's on my Twitter feed if you want to look for it. And she was equating what it was like to play Monopoly to the last 450 years of black history in the United States. And I was like, man, I never even thought about this. But she put it in a way that I thought it was great. And those are the two. I watched Killer Mike and her yesterday, and I'm like, well, these are the voices that need to rise up. And not the only ones, but when I heard Killer Mike speak, I'm like, man, this is going to be a speech that's going to be remembered. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. So I'm glad. I didn't realize that Prince was on Janelle Monáe's last album. I'll have to go listen to that. Eric Gantz sends in a tip and says, greetings, Rob. Seeking your opinion on a next generation question that my friends and I used to debate for hours. Oh, this is a good question. At the end of the Most Toys, was Data's phaser discharge really a glitch caused by the transporter, or was he trying to kill Kivas Fajo? Okay. For those of you who don't know your TNG, the penultimate episode of the third season of Next Generation, the episode that was before Best of Both Worlds when Picard became Locutus, is an episode called The Most Toys. And in it, there's a character named Kivas Fajo was a collector, an unscrupulous collector, and he scoured the galaxy, taking things and putting them in his collection. And one of the things that he did was steal data. And he was a killer. He was willing to kill people. He was truly an evil man, or I shouldn't say man. He was an alien. Now, he was played by Saul Rubinek in the episode. He was originally played by David Rappaport, who is a little person. You might recognize David Rappaport from things like Time Bandits. It was the last thing David Rappaport ever shot. He tried to take his own life after the first day of shooting and had to be replaced. He ultimately succeeded a few months later, and they replaced him with Saul Rubinek. And one of the questions at the end of that episode, after the character has killed, and the question was, did Data fire his phaser? Because there was a phaser discharge. I believe, in my own mind, that Data, in his using his positronic logic, fired the phaser. I think Data attempted to take Fajo's life, and I think he did. It didn't happen, but I think he made a decision, and from a logical standpoint, he made a choice and did that. And I do think that he indeed tried to do that. It's very interesting. Now, for those of you who might be interested, one of the things that I was doing when I was working on the documentaries for Star Trek The Next Generation is I wondered, we'd never seen the footage of Kivas Fajo, of David Rappaport's portrayal. So I asked, since we were dealing with the negative, if they could find that negative. And CBS, long story short, they found that negative and they transferred it and they sent it to me. And I cut that footage together, and it's actually on the Blu-ray of Star Trek Next Generation Season 3, where you can see his portrayal of the character. And for me, it was something I actually was able to edit footage from Star Trek The Next Generation that no one had ever seen before. It was never even touched. It was never even looked at. They found it sealed, so that was pretty interesting. So I'm going to say, yeah, man, I think that he did. I think he tried to do that. I think he tried to kill Kivas Fajo. Greg Howell sends in a super chat and says, quick correction, Lego isn't pulling sets. They're pulling police set-related advertising, which might be seen as tone-deaf at this time. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. I don't know. That's a very interesting question. And to be honest, I'm glad they're not, well, I hope they don't pull the sets, but I think pulling the advertising is something totally different, because I think, yeah, absolutely. Emil Johansson is here and says, Rob, please have another Zoom meeting. I will. I'm going to. Brian Ackenbauer is back, and he says, which 2020 movie are you most anxious to see? Black Widow, Wonder Woman, the new Bond, Black Widow, or Wonder Woman. Sorry to have brought up JJ's Trek. Won't happen again, sir. The two movies that I most want to see are No Time to Die and Tenet. And look, I love Bond, so I want to see Bond, but mostly I want to see Tenet, because I really, for the most part, I love Christopher Nolan's work, and it's a science fiction concept that's so intriguing to me, and it's what I love about big budget sci-fi, and it just looks so handsome, and I think it's going to be great. But in terms of the superhero movies, so Black Widow and Wonder Woman I want to see, but the superhero movie that I most want to see this year is The Eternals, because I'm a huge fan, and I want to see how do they do that. How do they approach the Eternals? I mean, are we going to get 1,000 years of history? Are we going to meet the Deviants? How is it going to tie into the Celestials and all that? I can't wait. I can't wait. So yeah, Mark C says, did you see the video I sent you about members of the black community and their response to the protesting? I don't know. I've watched so many videos. Are you talking about the one where the mayor of Minneapolis came out? Look. Here's my feeling about all of this stuff. There's a lot of craziness going on right now, and I just think what we need to do is this has to settle down, and we have to stop the protesting, and we have to also stop seeing or find out what's going on with COVID. And we need everybody to just calm down, all sides. I mean, look, we have we have to address these issues. We have to sit down and listen. But right now, I think that the black community is the voice that everybody needs to hear. Because you know what? Having already lived through LA in 92, I feel like it's 28 years later, and I feel like we're back to square one. Where's the last 28 years of my life? I'd like to think, and when I say that, I don't mean to, I mean in terms of me thinking we will evolve as human beings, and we haven't. And I think that's why when I saw people like, for everybody who says things I might not agree with, when I hear someone like Killer Mike get up and speak and give his speech in Atlanta, I think that his was a voice I think that everybody needs to hear. And but I'm not sure, Mark, exactly which video you're talking about, because I've been watching so many. Oh my God, I didn't know this. Honest Asian Guy says, hey, Rob, today would have been Prince's 62nd birthday. With that said, what is your personal favorite Prince song? Mine is a toss-up between The Most Beautiful Girl in the World and I Want to Be Your Lover. Well, let me take down my Prince tambourine, which I got at his show. It was a lot of money. It was probably the most expensive. I bought a lot of concert swag over the years, but I had to have this because it was like the coolest thing. I got it at a Staples Center show that I went to, and as everyone knows, I'm a fanatical Prince fan. One of my favorite Prince songs in the world is off Graffiti Bridge, and everyone's like, "Wait, what? What is it like? You know, Thieves in the Temple or something?" And my favorite Prince song, at least one of my favorite Prince songs, is Joy in Repetition. And one of my great regrets in life is I saw like Prince. I saw probably 30 Prince shows in my life, and I never saw him play that song live. I never saw him play that song live. I always wanted to see him play that song live. I love that song. But in terms of, some favorite Prince songs of mine, early Prince, I like I Want to Be Your Lover. I love Controversy. I love what's mostly off Dirty Mind. I love DMSR. I love Let's Pretend We're Married. I love International Lover. I love All the Critics Love You in New York. Lady Cab Driver. Favorite songs of mine. But there are so many Prince songs that I love. But off the top of my head, that's what jumped in. So, Honest Asian Guy, I didn't know it was his birthday today. Alexander Wilson says, birthdays was the worst days. Now we sip champagne when we thirsty. Biggie Smalls. Biggie maybe was the greatest. Tupac and him were very close friends before the madness. After watching The Last Dance, I forgot James Worthy was a Klingon on TNG. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. But if memory serves, he didn't have much to say. But yeah. Biggie, they were, yeah. What a waste. Monston Zayman sends in a super chat and says, what are you most excited for the future of DC? Black Adam, Batman, Suicide Squad, the Snyder Cut, Wonder Woman 84, or the future of Marvel, Eternals? Well, I just said I can't wait to see Eternals, but I love the MCU, and I have to, okay, Eternals, Moon Knight, because, anybody who knows me knows I love Moon Knight. Moon Knight and Eternals, Moon Knight, and I'm just so intrigued by WandaVision and Doctor Strange, the madness of the multiverse. What is that going to be? I don't know. Those are the things I'm most excited about. I really want to see, now that the Snyder Cut's going to get made, I really want to see that, obviously. I do want to see Matt Reeves' Batman movie. I do want to see Wonder Woman 84. I'm curious what they're going to do with Black Adam, because I love like Black Adam in like Kingdom Come. It'll be interesting to see how they tie into the how do they tie into Shazam. It was interesting. Me personally as DC, look, I grew up a DC kid. I came to Marvel later when I started buying comics in the 80s, and then I got sucked back in. And it was, for me, my favorite Marvel stuff. I love the X-Men. I love the Avengers. I love, of course, Moon Knight. But I love the MCU. But the DC stuff, I want to see it get good. You know what I really want to see, and I really hope the Snyder Cut deals with it. I love the new Teen Titans. The New Teen Titans has always been one of my favorite comic series of all time. Wolfman and Perez and Vic Stone, Cyborg, who I once called Colossus, I think. Somebody said, you called him Colossus, and then you called him Cyclops. Cyborg has always been, I love the Teen Titans. And I don't like that Cyborg is in the Justice League. I know in the comics they moved him over because to me, Cyborg was one of the cornerstones, the heart and soul of Titans. But now I understand. But to me, he's always going to be a new Teen Titan, and I love Cyborg so much. And by the way, Hot Toys made Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, and Aquaman from Justice League, but they didn't make Cyborg. Okay, now I have a 6-scale DC statue of Cyborg that will have displayed with them, but come on, man. Let's make a 6-scale Cyborg. How can you not? Since they're doing, and maybe with the Snyder Cut, with Justice League coming back out, I want to see all that backstory. I want to see Cyborg's backstory when he's playing football and how he got injured. I want to see a lot more of Cyborg's backstory in this movie. I hope it's there. So, and I hope Hot Toys. I want a Cyborg Hot Toys figure. How can you not make one? Mark C says, I apologize about the Lego information. I was misinformed. It does show how quick a narrative can change by even a little misinformation in a leading headline, even if I fall prey sometimes. Mark, I do too. I fall prey sometimes too. Absolutely. You, sir, are not the only ones, obviously. Okay, I got some letters. Jump into the letters. I'll read some more. Let's see what I've got. Let me get back to where I was here. Okay. Christopher McCulloch is here. Christopher McCulloch. Mr. Burnett, having extricated your foot from your mouth, I expect you'll be eating shit for a few days, if not more. I don't have Twitter to see your tweet, nor do I follow the politicking of your colleagues, so I really only know that in a fit of pique, you became another angry voice on the internet, something I guess I should have written more on. I'm a little disappointed in you, not to sound flippant. What really gets me, though, is only a few days prior to your outburst, I recall you invoking a very apropos episode of Star Trek, Day of the Dove. Hate is never the answer, Rob, no matter how justified. People under its influence are liable to say and do things they'll regret, like calling for bloody justice, an oxymoron. Gene Roddenberry was for some time an officer in the LAPD. He was also the speechwriter for the chief of police, a police force that until very recently had a certain reputation. I don't know how much of his experience there informed his desire to create a show like Star Trek that could show us a world with eyes unclouded by hate, but there's nothing more important right now for the people who have seen this future to be examples of it, and that means people like you and me, Rob, except only one of us has a Twitter account. Twitter. I understand the need for a platform to self-promote for people in the self-promotion industries, but if there was an analogy for an entity of energy that feeds on hatred, there is none better. Your perception is your reality in cyberspace, making anything viewed through its prism a subjective issue. Don't like the police, watch them billy club some demonstrators. Don't like the protester, watch rioters attack storefronts and store owners. The truth is social media hasn't opened people's eyes to the outrages in our society. It only makes them feel shame at having ignored them longer or doubling down on that ignorance. Well, I think it's both. The people who say you have nothing to apologize for are wrong. The people who say you are a monster are wrong. You are not the last thing you said or did, like everyone. You are the sum of your actions. It's the same for police and protester alike. The police's behavior are a symptom of our problem. They're trained to treat every scenario as potentially life-threatening, and that would take a toll on your perspective of people and the best of us, and most police are not that. But most police also can't be painted in that kind of a bad brush either. There's a lot of people, like I said, in law enforcement who go into law enforcement to help others. A lot of them went there because of injustice. They've seen injustice done to others, and they want to make sure that it never happens. So I think to vilify all cops, to vilify all groups of people, no matter who they are, is damaging. I mean, you can't. I mean, heck, even myself, I'm a middle-aged white dude. There are like 10 boxes would people would say that I've been I'm a garbage person now too, and I just think that's not right. Similarly, people who hang on. They're trained to treat every scenario as potentially life-threatening, and that would take a toll on your perspective of people and the best of us, and most police are not that. Similarly, people who carry guns are, by their nature, making every interaction potentially life-threatening. As a sometimes suspicious-looking person, if I see someone with a gun on the street, I don't need a reason to walk the other way. Your life is now a matter of perception, and who knows what skewed worldview has shaped theirs. They say the first casualty in truth, but they say the first casualty is truth, but understanding is a close second. Empathy for something you hate is not something people want right now, but I hope people like our Swedish brother Emil will try. You don't need to agree with something to attempt to understand it, and through that understanding, attempt to create something new and better. This too will pass. We have to make sure something comes from it without sacrificing the moral ground. Christopher, only a fool fights in a burning house. Well, Christopher, you've quickly become one of my favorite letter writers, and your ability to bring Star Trek into the discussion is pretty great, sir. And yes, only a fool fights in a burning house is a great quote from the episode Day of the Dove. So, yeah, I like that one. This one comes from Brian Eng. Hi, Rob. After you were booted off Collider, I was stunned when you returned to the Schmodown. Was it as simple as them asking you to return and you saying yes? Are the odds of your next return smaller than the first one? Here, look. What happened the first time had nothing to do with the Schmodown itself, and it even had to do with something outside of Collider that I had absolutely no control over. No control over. I thought that was handled poorly. I think turning your back on somebody who has done nothing but be faithful and for a while was wrong. I think that was wrong. This time, however, at least for the time being, yes, the odds of my return to the Schmodown this time are much smaller. I would say that, yes. But I appreciate you asking. Although I love the Schmodown and I love the community, and I really hope that that the Burning Troops win. I want to see I want to see Ken Knapsack win the Star Wars tournament. I want to see Brandon Hanna and Warfather go at it, and I would like to see one of them win the entire Inner Geekdom tournament, because I mean I did still care. I was still watching what was happening. So let's see what happens. This one comes from our friend Just a Brown Girl. Just a Brown Girl has written in a number of times before. Just a Brown Girl's log. Stardate 1:26 p.m. 5/20/2020. Hey Rob, happy Thursday. Did this letter get lost? Was this Thursday of 2020? Happy Thursday. I want to talk about perception. Once a week, you emphasize to viewers, old and new, that this is a community of limitless tolerance. That you, as in the universal you, can love whatever you want to love and not feel diminished by others in the Post-Geek Singularity who are only meh about it. We're not here to judge. We're here to share and listen. If we can tweak our perception of life, of people, of the world, just by a little, by letting their voices and experiences of others in, each time we do, I believe we become a little more human. I'm going to make a confession. I think we might be sort of neighbors. I've lived in Altadena for a few years, and now I just rent a 2-bedroom in Pasadena proper. In my effort to return unwanted AT&T equipment, I found I'd parked across the street from Lucky Baldwin's pub. Now, there are 3 Lucky Baldwin's pubs, just so you know. 3. The one I live by is on Colorado Boulevard. I love that I found it. It's not always easy to find great fish and chips. At least I hope they have great fish and chips. I think they do, as every self-respecting pub should. A while back, you talked about how law enforcement had killed a suspect on your street. That is correct. Last month, there was a man that was involved in a police chase who had fired at officers, and he was gunned down 100 feet, 200 feet from maybe a little bit more, 250 feet or something, on my street, literally right down the street. A while back, you talked how law enforcement had killed a suspect on your street. I'm not here to defend or condemn the killing of the suspect, but what you describe after still gives me pause. You mentioned that the body stayed lying in the street for hours, and my heart sank because I thought about Michael Brown. Again, I'm not here to defend or condemn any one party, but I'm in awe by the fact of leaving a dead body in the street. The people of Ferguson had said that they felt the police did it to taunt them, that it felt like some kind of warning. And the brown girl liberal in me wants to perceive to protect some racially motivated, extraordinary malice in Ferguson. And yet they did the same thing here in a lovely little quasi-suburb of Pasadena, California. Somehow I feel like it's important to let that in, but I'm honestly not sure how to process it. Let me be clear about this situation. When this happened, there were police everywhere. They didn't just leave a body alone on the street. It was completely surrounded by police and police vehicles. And I think the reason it was there for so long is they had to do a proper investigation about what happened. An officer was shot by this assailant, and he was shot in the leg. There was an exchange of gunfire. So I think the reason that he was in the street for a long period of time, it was not, they cordoned it all off. There were a lot of I thought the Pasadena police handled it as professionally as they possibly could have. But yeah, he was there for a long time, but he was never left as a display of power or anything like that. I took it to be completely, they had to investigate this action very thoroughly to find out what happened. So even though it was on my street, and I went down and I took pictures of what was going on. But the police were surrounding it all, and he was not on display for all to see. It was just shocking because it literally happened, right outside. The chase happened right out on my street. Like, it's literally on my street. It wasn't even down as far as the street corner. And there was, a whole armada of cop cars, and it was just crazy. It was just crazy. But I do think that the Pasadena police have to be commended with how they handled it. And I thought they handled it with respect and great professionalism. A few weeks ago, a listener mentioned that maybe the IMDb needed some spring cleaning, that we should chuck all films that have a rating of 5 or below. No! I'm paraphrasing badly, and I'm sure that the comment was in jest, but it stung a little. I'm not here to make the argument that even bad films have the right to exist. You see, unlike my first feature, my second feature film saw the light of day. I never sold it, and we made it into Cineplexes, but we did have a decent festival run, which has led to a semi-decent second life on streaming. For a while, our IMDb rating was 8.7. Then we dropped to 6.6, and we got nailed on Amazon in the same week. 2 people gave us 1 star in both spaces. One of the comments read, if they could have given us 0 stars, they would have. Ooh. Look, I got those reviews too. People either liked Free Enterprise or they hated it. And there was a lot of people that hated it. One of the comments read that if they could have given us a 0, they would have. It just seems that the subject of our little movie was an affront to their religious sensibilities. Just like that, we went from being a very well-rated movie to a probably maybe okay-rated movie. At a glance on our IMDb page, that's all we would appear to be. I love your Bulgaria story. It feels cocky or kooky. I think it said it feels kooky to be the crazy American with all your. Oh, okay. It feels kooky to be or cocky. Either would work. It feels cocky to be the crazy American with all your pie in the sky entrepreneurial schemes, right? I had a similar experience last year. I was meeting a woman in hopes of doing business with her, and she was really impressed that I said I would come to meet her, and I did. She thought it was very American of me, that I felt empowered to just jump on a plane and go meet a stranger, not knowing what I would find when I arrived. And I thought to myself, well, you could do it too if you wanted. I'm old enough and wise enough to understand that no one is going to give me anything. If I want it, I have to go after it, period. And yes, being a brown girl means I do have to be twice as good to get half as much as white folks. But that's just the world we live in. And quite frankly, I'm twice as good because I want for things that deeply, and my work speaks for itself. But I digress. Back to the lovely English woman. Seeing my jaunt across the pond from her perspective, it probably did look like a kind of audacity that was deeply American. My apologies for being vague. I'm not ready to tell that story yet. I know, this letter doesn't have anything at all to do with comics or movies or entertainment. In fact, it's kind of a downer letter. I would say it's just the opposite. I guess my point is I'm a proponent of seeing the world as broad a lens. I am a proponent of seeing the world in as broad of a lens as I can because I believe that is what's necessary to be a better artist and a more rounded creator. So once again, I thank you for creating a space where every idea and perception and thoughtfully expressed opinion is safe to just hang out, like a dirty thought in a nice, clean mind. That's right, Rob. I circled back to Pump Up the Volume. Have you rewatched it yet? It's on my super short bucket list of movies I would remake. There's so much new to explore in the realm of freedom of speech and privacy and accountability of our public figures and identity, particularly in the digital age we now live in. I'd reimagine it with possibly Zendaya in the leading role of a Malia Obama-type character. Maybe one day. Thanks for reading and letting me hang out. Just a Brown Girl. Stardate 7:20 a.m. 6/6/2020. And then she goes on to say, hey, Rob, well, the world certainly has gone to hell in a handbasket, has it not? My life has been turned upside down in a good way, so I haven't listened for weeks. Work has been relentless, and I've been a dependent now, so my life for the first time ever truly isn't mine anymore. But I'm getting caught up, I promise. What you're going through now is crappy. I'm pretty sure there's more to it than what you talked about on your apology post. Midnight's Edge sent you some love yesterday too. Public apologies take character, especially the sincere ones. I cringe at the thought of using my Twitter account. I always have. I've always likened it to a gigantic bullseye awaiting its turn to be pummeled and pierced into oblivion. But what you do, what Campea does, it requires guts and fortitude. Like the fair-weathered followers fall away, Rob. The true post-geek singularity, we gotcha. For years, I've been ruminating on a black Romeo and Juliet. I was supposed to be my take and commentary on police brutality, and it was called Red, Black, and Blue. Red for blood, black for skin, blue for police uniforms. I wanted Usher and Amber Riley to play the leads, not as singers, as dramatic actors. I even wrote 5 sonnets in Shakespearean meter to serve as act breaks. I wanted to see if some folks would actually mistake one or two of them for the one Shakespeare wrote and go looking for them in the complete works. Hubris, I know. But since this fantasy tetralogy project has moved to the front of my creative headspace, I had recently lamented that maybe my Romeo and Juliet is a story whose time has passed. Maybe body cams have taught law enforcement to behave. Well, considering my lower-class liberal Southern California privilege checked, I guess I need to finish that script after all. You're not going to lose this, Brown Girl. As a favorite author of mine once said, I believe I know something of your heart now. I have said it before, I'll say it again. You truly engage in a way that is rare, with frequency and earnest. And that is a bravery that lurker girls like me could never achieve, or in my case, ever aspire to. Stay hard. By the way, for people, don't freak out. She's talking about Happy Hard Harry, or Hard Happy Harry, Christian Slater's character in Pump Up the Volume. Look, I did it again. Just have a guilty pleasure night. Watch Pump Up the Volume with Elizabeth. At minimum, the music is great. Everybody knows. Finally, my mom doesn't like Picard. She thinks what they did to the characters doesn't make sense, but she does like the new Spock. She thinks the movies are fun, as do I. Thanks for reading. Apologies for the long letter and for any repetition of recent topics. Eventually in Burnett time, always the same Burnett channel. I am just a brown girl. Well, why you got to tell us your movie so the Post-Geek Singularity can go rush to Amazon and give it good reviews on the IMDb. What is it? Will you not tell us? You have to tell us what it is. I want to thank you for that. And I think, it's really interesting. Like you bring up the story about Bulgaria. For those of you who don't know, I was in Bulgaria producing The Hills Run Red. And since you brought up Bulgaria and it's The Hills Run Red, might I take this opportunity to remind everybody that the film I produced, The Hills Run Red, which came out in 2009, is finally coming out on Blu-ray for the first time on Scream Factory with 6.5 hours of new Blu-ray special features. Director Dave Parker and I teamed up and produced, I think, an incredible Blu-ray package for all of you. It might not look, it's a nasty, short little horror film that I'm very proud of. But yeah, how many YouTubers have a movie coming out from Shout Factory, Scream Factory on Blu-ray on June 16th? So check that out. Yeah, we're very proud of it. Very proud of it here. Very proud of it. But so what little Just a Brown Girl is referring to is a story when I was in Bulgaria producing the film in the hotel that I was staying in. There was a bar there, and there was a woman, beautiful girl, by the way. I became friends with her and her boyfriend, and she ran the place. She was really good at what she did. And we were out once, and I finally said to her, I go, what is it? What do you guys want to do? And she said, well, we want to open our cafe. We want to open a place. Now, keep in mind, Bulgaria, now it's 11 years. We were there in 2008, so it's 12 years later. But it was recently, part of the Soviet Union. So it hadn't been free for very long. 20 years or something. And I said, you guys should, man. You're great at running. You're great at running stuff. And she looked at me. She was all taken aback. And she's like, nobody's ever said that before. And I was like, what? She goes, well, here in Bulgaria, if I were to say that to somebody, they would say, oh, you can't do that. You can't just do that. And I'm like, really? And I realized that it was a very American thing to just think stuff up and do it. I was always taught that you can just dream stuff up and do it, like anybody. You don't even necessarily and now with social media and with the tools that we have at our disposal, you can just and not only that, if you have friends, you can just think stuff up and do it. I have to tell you, there's and this is a thing that Americans have that we don't even know we have. Like, yeah, man, that sounds fun. You want to do that? I'll help you. Let's put on a show. I have a bar, and let's do that. And I didn't realize, and I've encountered this attitude around the world, that one of the things, like Americans, we can be silly and loud and boisterous, and we have our problems, and judging by what's been going on in our country of late, we certainly do. But I think that the one thing that Americans do have going for us, ultimately, and one of maybe our best qualities, is we can dream big, and then, hey, we might fall on our faces, but we'll seek those dreams out. You can be a kid, and you can say, I would like to do this, and people will be like, you should. You absolutely can do that. How can I help you? And I've found in my life that's very much the case. Let's go do this. Okay. Certainly when I was younger, I could think stuff up and people would jump on the bandwagon. Let's go do that. And you'd make it happen. Now, is it hard? Yes. But what I can only imagine, from some of the people I've known in Europe, if you were to be like, okay, you're an American, you call somebody up, it probably was a project related. I would assume Just a Brown Girl, that maybe somebody's life story you wanted. And people get contacted all the time. Hey, I want to do this. Hey, I want to do that. That's why when people call me up to go on their shows, I'll come on your show. And they're always apologetic. They're like, well, we don't have many subscribers, or we don't have as many subscribers as you. I'm like, I don't care. If somebody's going to go do something, I like to support people's endeavors. Let people go do what they're going to do and help them. I get letters. You've heard me read letters from people that have written me like 15 years ago. I might have run into them at a convention and given them some encouraging, like, you should go do that. And they did it. They go do it. And I love that. Who also loved that was John Schnepp. John Schnepp loved it when people said, I want to do this. And John would be like, you got to go do that, man. And he believed it. John Schnepp, when he said, I need to do something, John would be overjoyed if you wanted to send things or create things or make things. He was very supportive of that. He really, really, really wanted that. He loved that. So I love that I can only imagine, like, what must that woman have thought? Like, you're coming from America to see her. You have to get on a plane, first of all. You have to spend money. And I understand, but I'll tell you something. She might come from a different culture and think but she'll never, ever stop respecting you for doing that. Never. This next letter comes from the Wakandan Forever. Hi, Rob. This is the Wakandan Forever. I'm a fan from the John Campea Show. I wanted to say I saw your apology video, and I know it was heartfelt. Everyone is angry right now with COVID-19, the deaths of innocent people, riot, and all of the injustice that has been on display for the world to see. It shows a lot of character to admit to things and to apologize publicly, knowing that there are those who will criticize you no matter what you do. As a fan from the John Campea Show, I need to let you know we support you. You are an important part of the show, and we're looking forward to seeing you return in the near future. Thanks. Everyone stay healthy, productive, and safe. Wakanda forever. I am very much looking forward. That's a movie I really want to see. I think that Black Panther 2 is going to be like Winter Soldier. I think it's going to be that transcendent. Well, everybody, I've been going for a long time. I'm barely putting a dent in these letters. So if I haven't read your letters, please bear with me. But in order to spare my moderators, I'm going to jump off the show. I will be back tomorrow. You might be surprised. I might be showing up somewhere else tomorrow, too. Anyway, I will be back tomorrow with Robservations. I want to thank everybody for everybody's support, both all the letters, the deluge of letters. I've gotten some interesting ones that I'm going to get to as well that aren't so nice, but I'm going to read them anyway. And if I haven't got to your letter, have no fear. There's still so many I'm trying to get through. But I want to thank everybody for the support. And I especially want to thank my moderating staff for being here. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank his wife, Heidi. I want to thank Louis Yu. I want to thank Jordy Lyons. Did I say Greg Smith? The great Greg Smith? I don't know if I said Greg Smith. Maybe I did. My brain is frazzled. And I also want to thank the Richard and Dan V., who also are helping out. If you haven't gone over to the Facebook page, to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, I invite everyone over there. The Richard is always throwing watch parties now and showing interesting things. And, of course, our show, Whining About Movies, that I do with Elizabeth, will be back tomorrow night. I think hopefully at 6. We're going to do it early at 6. We are watching Jaws in honor of its release on 4K. We're watching Jaws. The next Whining About Movies is Jaws. So once again, I want to thank everybody for being here. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? I might have missed people. Before I jump out entirely, there's a few more people. Alexander Wilson sends in a tip, and he says it's Prince's birthday. He says, the beautiful ones, Computer Blue, Darling Nikki, all off Purple Rain, good ones. Adore, Electric Chair, love both of those. Sign of the Times, great. You know what? She's Always in My Hair is one of my favorite Prince songs ever, as he says, but I love the long version. She's Always in My Hair. Boys and Girls, isn't it? Girls and boys, he only knew her for a little while. He had grown accustomed to her smile. He was a surprise guest performer for a Stevie Wonder concert in D.C. 5 years ago. They tore the house down. Oh, my God. To see Prince and Stevie Wonder, oh, my God. Amazing. Mark Evans says, I'm a little nervous about Wonder Woman 1984. She's swinging from lightning with her lasso. Lightning. Come on, man. She might even have an invisible jet. Mark, you must have faith. You must have faith, Mark Evans. I think it looks kind of cool to me. But anyway, remember, all you have to do is listen. Everybody has a story to tell. All you have to do is listen. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I bring Robservations episode number 436 to a close. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I very much appreciate that you are here. Thanks very much. And as always, have a better day.